At the heart of this story are two couples. Isabella and Russell Hawthorne, both in their early 50s, had been fixtures of the community for over 2 decades. They were the couple everyone looked up to. Successful, well-respected, and seemingly happily married, their home was often the center of neighborhood gatherings. Just 3 houses down, the newly wedded Zara and Eric Donovan had recently moved in. Both in their mid-20s, they brought a youthful energy to the street that had long been dominated by older families and retirees. Their arrival was met with curiosity and warmth by their neighbors, particularly the Hawthornes. Little did anyone know that the lives of these 4 individuals would soon become entangled in a web of desire, obsession, and murder. What began as a daring experiment in sexual exploration would spiral into a nightmare that would leave one dead, one behind bars, and 2 others grappling with the consequences of their choices. This is the story of how a seemingly innocent proposition led to a brutal crime that would be splashed across national headlines and forever change the lives of those involved. It's a cautionary tale of the dangers that can lurk beneath the surface of even the most ordinary-seeming individuals and the devastating consequences of stepping outside societal norms. Isabella Hawthorne had always been the golden girl. Growing up in Seattle, she was the captain of her high school cheerleading squad, prom queen and valedictorian. But Isabella was more than just a pretty face. She had a sharp mind and boundless ambition. She met Russell Hawthorne during her sophomore year at the University of Washington. Russell, 2 years her senior, was the star quarterback with a bright future ahead of him. Their courtship was the stuff of campus legend, the perfect couple that everyone envied. They married shortly after Isabella's graduation, with dreams of conquering the world together. Russell's promising football career was cut short by a knee injury in his first year as a professional player. He pivoted to sports management, quickly climbing the corporate ladder. Isabella, meanwhile, pursued a career in marketing, her creativity and drive making her a rising star in the field. Their move coincided with the birth of their daughter, Lily. They threw themselves into parenthood and their careers with equal fervor. From the outside, they seemed to have it all: successful careers, a beautiful home, and a loving family. But as the years went by, cracks began to appear in their perfect facade. Russell's work kept him away from home for longer stretches, and he began to put on weight, losing the athletic physique that had first attracted Isabella. For her part, Isabella found herself increasingly restless. With Lily away at college, the house felt empty, and her job no longer provided the satisfaction it once did. Isabella began to wonder if this was all there was to life. She started yoga classes and joined a book club, searching for something to fill the growing void she felt. She found herself envying the young couples she saw, with their passionate embraces and carefree laughter. When was the last time she and Russell had shared such moments? Russell, oblivious to his wife's discontent, continued his routine of long hours at the office, followed by evenings in front of the TV with a beer in hand. Their conversations became perfunctory, limited to discussions about bills, home maintenance, and occasional updates about Lily. As her 50th birthday approached, Isabella felt a growing sense of panic. Was this how she would spend the rest of her life? The woman who had once been voted most likely to succeed now felt trapped in a gilded cage of her own making. It was in this state of mind that Isabella first laid eyes on Eric Donovan. Young, handsome, with a lean swimmer's build, Eric represented everything that was missing from Isabella's life: excitement, passion, and the promise of adventure. For the first time in years, Isabella felt a stirring of desire. As she watched Eric and his young wife Zara move into the neighborhood, an idea began to form in her mind. An idea that would change everything. Zara Donovan, born Zara Khalil, was the daughter of Lebanese immigrants who had settled in Portland 2 decades earlier. Growing up, she had always felt caught between 2 worlds: the traditional values of her parents and the liberal, free-spirited culture of the Pacific Northwest. With her olive skin, Zara stood out in a city that was predominantly white. From a young age, Zara showed a passion for art. Her parents, while supportive, always emphasized the importance of a practical career. As a compromise, Zara studied graphic design at Portland State University, finding a way to merge her creative instincts with a marketable skill. It was during her final year at PSU that Zara met Eric Donovan. She was working on her thesis project at a local coffee shop when Eric, a barista there, struck up a conversation about her sketches. Eric, with his easy charm and boyish good looks, immediately captured Zara's attention. Eric had grown up in a small town in rural Oregon, the youngest of 4 boys in a working-class family. He'd moved to Portland 3 years earlier, drawn by the city's vibrant art scene and progressive culture. While he worked as a barista to pay the bills, his true passion was photography. His Instagram account, filled with moody black and white portraits in stark urban landscapes, had a modest but growing following. Their romance was a whirlwind. Within weeks of their first meeting, Eric and Zara were inseparable. They spent their days exploring Portland's hidden gems, secret gardens, underground art galleries, hole-in-the-wall music venues. Eric introduced Zara to urban exploration, and she in turn taught him about Lebanese cuisine and culture. To Zara, Eric represented freedom and self-expression. He encouraged her to pursue her art without compromise, to break free from the expectations of her family and society. With Eric, Zara felt seen and understood in a way she never had before. For Eric, Zara was his muse and his anchor. Her quiet strength and unwavering support gave him the confidence to pursue his photography more seriously. He began to book small gigs, weddings, local band promotional shots, even a few magazine spreads. Their decision to get married came as a surprise to many who knew them. Both sets of parents expressed concern about the speed of their relationship, but Eric and Zara were convinced they had found their soulmates. They had a small ceremony in a sculpture garden, surrounded by their closest friends and family. The move was a practical decision. As freelancers, they needed a space that could serve as both home and studio. The quiet suburb offered affordable housing, close enough to the city for work opportunities. They saw it as the perfect place to start their life together, envisioning lazy Sunday mornings in their backyard and cozy evenings planning their future. Little did they know that their new neighborhood held secrets and temptations that would test the strength of their young love. As they unpacked boxes in their new home, neither Eric nor Zara could have imagined the turmoil that lay ahead, or the devastating consequences their choices would have. The annual summer block party was a tradition that dated back decades. Every year on the last Saturday of August, Sycamore Lane would transform into a bustling fairground of sorts. Neighbors would bring out grills, coolers full of drinks, and folding tables laden with potluck dishes. Children would run around with water guns and bubble wands, while adults caught up on neighborhood gossip and sipped cold beers. This year's party held a special significance for the residents of Sycamore Lane. It was the official welcome for the Donovans, the street's newest additions. Isabella Hawthorne, as the unofficial social director of the neighborhood, had taken it upon herself to ensure that Zara and Eric felt welcomed. As the afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the street, Isabella made her way to the Donovans, who were standing somewhat awkwardly at the edge of the gathering. "Isabella, you look lovely," Russell called out as she walked past, her sundress floating around her legs. She flashed him a smile, but her eyes were already fixed on Eric. "Eric and Zara, welcome to the neighborhood," Isabella said warmly, air-kissing Zara's cheeks and letting her hand linger perhaps a moment too long on Eric's arm. "We're so glad you could join us." The conversation flowed easily, lubricated by the fruity sangria Isabella had brought along. Zara found herself drawn into a discussion about local art galleries with some of the other neighbors, while Eric and Isabella drifted towards the Hawthorns' front yard. "You have a beautiful home," Eric commented, his eyes roving over the house. Isabella beamed with pride. "Why, thank you," she replied. "You should see the inside. We recently renovated the master bathroom. Perhaps I could give you a tour sometime. Get you some ideas for your own place?" The flirtatious undertone in Isabella's voice was unmistakable. Eric, slightly taken aback but not displeased, felt a flush creep up his neck. Before he could respond, Russell appeared, clapping a hand on Eric's shoulder. "Hope my wife isn't talking your ear off, son." Russell chuckled. Isabella shot him a look that mixed annoyance and affection. "Actually, she was just offering to show me your renovation," Eric said, his voice slightly strained. As the evening wore on, the two couples found themselves gravitating towards each other. Zara, charmed by Russell's dad jokes and genuine interest in her artwork, found herself relaxing for the first time since moving in. Isabella, meanwhile, hung on Eric's every word as he described his photography projects. By the time the party wound down, seeds had been planted, seeds of attraction, curiosity, and temptation that would soon grow into something none of them could have anticipated. It was a week after the block party that Isabella first broached the subject with Russell. They were in bed, the TV droning in the background, When Isabella turned to her husband with a mischievous glint in her eye, Isabella broached the subject with Russell one night as they lay in bed. Her voice was casual, but there was an undercurrent of excitement as she asked if he had ever considered spicing up their love life. Russell, half asleep, mumbled incoherently at first. Isabella pressed on, clarifying that she meant specifically in the bedroom. This caught Russell's attention and he became suddenly alert. Cautiously, Russell asked what exactly she had in mind. Isabella took a deep breath before suggesting they try swapping partners with another couple. The silence that followed her proposal was deafening. Russell stared at his wife, trying to determine if she was serious. As he realized she was, a mix of emotions played across his face: shock, intrigue, and a hint of arousal. Over the next few days, the Hawthorns had numerous discussions about Isabella's proposition. Russell, initially hesitant, found himself warming to the idea. The thought of being with a younger woman stirred something in him he thought had long since died. It was Isabella who finally suggested the Donovans. They're young, attractive, and new to the area, she reasoned. They might be open to something like this. Approaching the younger couple proved to be a delicate matter. It was at a neighborhood barbecue that Isabella, emboldened by several glasses of wine, pulled Zara aside. The conversation was awkward at first, with Isabella dancing around the subject, but once the proposition was laid out, Zara's reaction surprised her. Instead of outrage or disgust, there was curiosity in the younger woman's eyes. The evening of the swap arrived with a mix of nervous energy and anticipation. The Hawthorns had suggested using their home, citing their finished basement as a perfect, private setting. As Zara and Eric walked up the driveway hand in hand, Zara could feel her heart pounding in her chest. "Are we really doing this?" He squeezed her hand reassuringly, but she could see the apprehension in his eyes as well. Isabella greeted them at the door, her smile a little too bright, her laugh a little too loud. The forced casualness of the situation was palpable as they made small talk over glasses of expensive red wine. Russell busied himself with the stereo, filling the room with soft jazz in an attempt to ease the tension. After what seemed like an eternity of awkward conversation, Isabella finally stood up. "So," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "shall we?" They had agreed beforehand on the pairings, Isabella with Eric, Russell with Zara. As they split off, Zara couldn't help but glance back at Eric, a moment of uncertainty passing between them. But then Eric disappeared down the hallway with Isabella, and Zara found herself alone with Russell. Russell led Zara to the guest bedroom, his hand gentle on the small of her back. Despite his earlier bravado, he felt a wave of nervousness wash over him. It had been years since he'd been with anyone other than Isabella. Zara, sensing his hesitation, took the initiative. She reached up and kissed him softly, then more passionately. Russell responded, his hands exploring her young, firm body with growing confidence. Meanwhile, in the master bedroom, Isabella was living out the fantasies she'd been harboring since she first laid eyes on Eric. His youthful energy and enthusiasm more than made up for any lack of experience. Isabella felt desired, beautiful, alive in a way she hadn't in years. Eric, for his part, was intoxicated by Isabella's confidence and sensuality. As the encounters reached their climax, a series of emotions washed over each participant. Excitement, pleasure, guilt, and an unexpected emptiness all mingled together in a confusing cocktail. Afterwards, as they all reconvened in the living room, an awkward silence fell over the group. The reality of what they had done seemed to hit them all at once. Zara couldn't meet Eric's eyes, focusing instead on smoothing non-existent wrinkles from her dress. Russell cleared his throat several times, but couldn't seem to find any words. Only Isabella seemed truly at ease, a satisfied smile playing at the corners of her mouth. It was Eric who finally broke the silence. "Well," he said, his attempt at a casual tone falling flat. That was something. The tension broke and nervous laughter filled the room. They made stilted small talk for a few more minutes before the Donovans made their excuses and left. As Zara and Eric walked home in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, they were unaware of the seismic shift that had just occurred in their relationships. Back in the Hawthorne house, Isabella hummed to herself as she cleaned up, already thinking about the next time. Russell watched her, a nagging feeling of unease growing in the pit of his stomach. None of them realized that this night was just the beginning, the first step down a path that would lead to obsession, betrayal, and ultimately, tragedy. In the days following the swap, Life seemed to return to normal, but beneath the surface, changes were brewing, particularly in Eric Donovan. Eric found himself unable to stop thinking about Isabella. The encounter had awakened something in him, a hunger he'd never experienced before. He began to find excuses to be outside when he knew Isabella would be leaving for work. He'd wave, trying to appear casual, but his eyes would linger on her long after she'd driven away. Zara noticed the change in her husband almost immediately. Eric seemed distracted, often lost in thought. When she tried to initiate intimacy, he was either too tired or not in the mood. Their once passionate lovemaking became infrequent and mechanical. One afternoon, Zara came home early from a client meeting to find Eric's photography workspace in disarray. As she began to tidy up, she noticed something odd. Hidden beneath a stack of prints was a folder filled with photos of Isabella. Some were clearly taken from a distance, capturing Isabella gardening, getting her mail, or walking to her car. Others were more intimate, zoomed-in shots through windows, Isabella in various states of undress. Zara felt her stomach churn. This wasn't just a harmless crush or the after-effects of their encounter. This was something much more sinister. Meanwhile, Isabella had begun to notice Eric's increased presence in her daily life. At first, she was flattered by the attention, even reciprocating with flirtatious glances and accidental touches when they'd run into each other. But as the days wore on, Eric's behavior became more erratic and intense. He began sending her messages at all hours, alternating between passionate declarations of love and angry accusations. When she didn't respond quickly enough, Isabella tried to let him down gently, explaining that their encounter was a one-time thing, but Eric refused to accept it. One night, Isabella woke to the sound of something hitting her bedroom window. Peering out, she saw Eric standing in her front yard, a handful of pebbles in his hand. His eyes, wild and unfocused, locked onto hers. "I can't live without you, Isabella," he called out, his voice breaking. "We're meant to be together." Isabella quickly closed the curtains, her heart racing. She woke Russell, who grumbled as he went to confront Eric. By the time Russell made it outside, Eric had disappeared into the night, leaving only a crumpled bouquet of flowers on the front step. As Isabella lay awake that night, she realized with growing horror that her exciting sexual experiment had unleashed something dark and dangerous. She had no idea how right she was, or how tragic the consequences would be. Over the next few weeks, Eric's behavior spiraled further out of control. His obsession with Isabella consumed every aspect of his life. He neglected his photography business, spending hours stalking Isabella's social media accounts and driving by her house. Zara watched helplessly as her husband transformed into someone she barely recognized. Isabella, for her part, vacillated between fear and a perverse excitement. Part of her was terrified of Eric's growing instability, but another part, a part she was ashamed to admit existed, was thrilled by his obsessive attention. It made her feel desirable, powerful in a way she hadn't in years. The situation came to a head one afternoon, when Isabella returned home to find Eric sitting in her living room. "How did you get in here?" she gasped, her hand flying to her throat. Eric smiled, a cold, unsettling expression that sent chills down Isabella's spine. "You gave me a key, remember? For watering the plants when you were on vacation." Isabella's mind raced. That had been months ago, before the swap, before everything had gone wrong. She should have asked for it back. Why hadn't she asked for it back? Eric stood, moving towards her with predatory grace. "We need to talk, Isabella," he said, his voice low and intense. "About us, about our future together." Isabella backed away, fumbling for her phone. "There is no us, Eric," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "You need to leave." But Eric kept advancing, his eyes wild with a mixture of love and madness. "You don't mean that," he insisted. "I know you feel what I feel. We're destined to be together, Isabella. I won't let anyone come between us." As Eric reached for her, Isabella let out a scream. The sound seemed to snap Eric out of his trance. He blinked, looking around as if seeing the room for the first time. Without another word, he brushed past Isabella and out the front door. Shaking, Isabella collapsed onto the couch. She knew she should call the police, but what would she say? That she'd willingly slept with her young neighbor, and now he was stalking her. The thought of the scandal, of everyone knowing what she'd done, was unbearable. Little did Isabella know, her silence would have devastating consequences. For in his twisted mind, Eric took her failure to report him as a sign of her secret love, and he was determined to eliminate any obstacles standing in their way, no matter the cost. The tension that had been building for weeks finally erupted on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Isabella was alone in her house, Russell having left for a golf game with friends. She was in the kitchen, mindlessly flipping through a magazine when she heard the back door open. Isabella called out with a trembling voice, asking if it was Eric. There was no response, only the sound of footsteps moving through the house. Her heart racing, Isabella grabbed a kitchen knife, holding it out in front of her like a shield. When Eric appeared in the doorway, his eyes were glazed and unfocused, and he reeked of alcohol. He slurred that he had seen Russell drive away, declaring that now they could be together as they were supposed to be. Isabella pleaded with Eric, telling him he needed help and that this wasn't right, but she couldn't finish her sentence. Eric wasn't listening. He lunged forward, trying to grab Isabella. She shrieked and swung the knife wildly, connecting with Eric's arm and drawing blood. The sight of his own blood seemed to enrage Eric further. He roared an insult at her and charged again. In the ensuing struggle, the knife clattered to the floor. Eric's hands found Isabella's throat, squeezing with terrifying strength. Isabella clawed at his face, gasping for air as her vision began to darken around the edges. In desperation, she brought her knee up sharply, connecting with Eric's groin. The blow caused him to double over in pain, releasing his grip on her throat. Isabella scrambled away, her fingers closing around the handle of the fallen knife. As Eric straightened up, his face contorted with rage, Isabella acted on pure instinct. She thrust the knife forward, feeling it sink into Eric's chest. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Eric looked down at the knife protruding from his body, a look of surprise replacing the anger on his face. Then slowly he crumpled to the floor. Isabella stared at Eric's still form, the reality of what she'd done crashing over her. With shaking hands, she reached for her phone and dialed 911. The quiet of the community was shattered by the wail of sirens as police cars and an ambulance converged on the Hawthorne residence. Neighbors poured out onto their front lawns, watching in shock as paramedics rushed into the house, only to emerge shortly after, shaking their heads grimly. Detective Liam Reeves, a veteran of the Portland Police Department, arrived on the scene to find a distraught Isabella Hawthorne being questioned by officers. Her hands and clothes were stained with blood, her eyes wild with shock and fear. As Reeves approached, he overheard snippets of Isabella's statement. She was saying that Eric had attacked her, that she had no choice, in expressing shock and disbelief at what she had done. Reeves took charge of the scene, ordering a thorough search of the house and surrounding area, while crime scene technicians combed through the kitchen, photographing the bloody knife and the signs of struggle. Reeves turned his attention to the neighbors. Zara Donovan stood at the edge of the police tape, her face a mask of disbelief and horror. Reeves approached her gently, introducing himself as Detective Reeves and confirming that the victim was her husband. Zara nodded mutely, tears streaming down her face. When Reeves pressed her about when she had last seen Eric, Zara managed to choke out that it had been that morning. She explained that Eric had said he was going for a walk, but her voice trailed off as she struggled to process the situation. Unable to continue, she broke down sobbing. Reeves made a note in his pad before moving on to question other neighbors. As he gathered more information, a story began to emerge of a quiet neighborhood rocked by an unthinkable crime. As the body of Eric Donovan was wheeled out on a gurney, covered by a sheet, Reeves couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this case than a simple home invasion gone wrong. The look in Isabella Hawthorne's eyes, a mixture of relief and guilt, told him that unraveling the truth would be a complex and delicate process. In the days following Eric's death, Detective Reeves dove deep into the lives of both the Hawthornes and the Donovans. What he uncovered was a tangled web of secrets and lies that painted a very different picture from the initial reports of a random break-in. Interviews with neighbors revealed whispers of an illicit affair between Isabella and Eric. Cell phone records showed an overwhelming number of calls and messages from Eric to Isabella in the weeks leading up to the incident, many of which had gone unanswered. But it was the discovery of Eric's photography studio that blew the case wide open. Hidden among his professional equipment, detectives found a camera with a high-powered zoom lens and memory cards filled with hundreds of photos of Isabella, many taken without her knowledge. When confronted with this evidence, Zara broke down. Through tears, she revealed the truth about the partner swap and the subsequent obsession that had gripped her husband. She spoke of Eric's erratic behavior, his neglect of their marriage, and her own fears about his mental state. Isabella, faced with the mounting evidence, finally confessed to the full story. She admitted to the affair and the stalking, but maintained that the final confrontation had been self-defense. Russell, devastated by his wife's infidelity, nonetheless stood by her side throughout the ordeal. As Reeves pieced together the events that led to that fatal Sunday afternoon, he was struck by the tragedy of it all. What had begun as a misguided attempt to spice up a stagnant marriage had spiraled into an obsession that cost a young man his life and forever changed the lives of all involved. The case, once thought to be a straightforward home invasion, was now revealed to be a complex tale of desire, betrayal, and deadly obsession. The prosecution painted Isabella as a bored housewife who initiated an affair with a younger man, then killed him to keep her indiscretion secret. They emphasized the premeditated nature of her actions, pointing to the convenient absence of her husband on the day of the killing. The defense, led by high-profile attorney Simone Jeffries, argued passionately that Isabella was a victim of stalking and harassment who acted in self-defense. They presented evidence of Eric's obsessive behavior and called expert witnesses to testify about the psychological impact of stalking on victims. Zara's testimony proved to be a turning point in the trial. Her emotional account of Eric's descent into obsession and her own fear for Isabella's safety swayed many jurors. "She's not the monster they're making her out to be," Zara said through tears. "Eric, he wasn't himself at the end. What happened is a tragedy, but Isabella was as much a victim as anyone." In his closing arguments, the prosecutor urged the jury not to be swayed by emotion. "The facts are clear," he insisted. "Mrs. Hawthorne made a series of choices that led to this tragic outcome. She must be held accountable." Simone Jeffries, in her rebuttal, appealed to the jury's sense of empathy. "Put yourself in Isabella's shoes," she implored. Terrified, alone, confronted by a man who had been stalking her for weeks, she did what anyone would do. She fought for her life. As the jury filed out to begin deliberations, the courtroom buzzed with speculation. The fate of Isabella Hawthorne and the final judgment on this suburban tragedy now rested in their hands. Isabella Hawthorne was sentenced to 5 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 3. As Isabella was led away from the courtroom, the impact of the tragedy on all involved was palpable. Russell Hawthorne, his face haggard from the stress of the trial, watched his wife disappear through the courtroom doors. Despite the revelations of her infidelity, he had stood by her throughout the ordeal. Now he faced the prospect of years alone, grappling with the consequences of their ill-fated experiment. Zara Donovan, widowed and alone, retreated from public life. The trauma of losing Eric and the public exposure of their private lives left deep scars. She threw herself into her art, producing a series of haunting paintings that would later be hailed as a powerful exploration of grief and betrayal. The residents struggled to come to terms with the events that had shattered their peaceful community. The Hawthorne and Donovan houses stood empty, constant reminders of the tragedy that had unfolded. Some neighbors moved away, unable to bear the memories. Those who stayed found their trust in one another irrevocably altered. Spencer Howard was a man who seemed to have it all. Born into one of Fairview's oldest families, he had inherited not just wealth, but also a legacy of civic responsibility. Spencer had taken the reins of the family business after graduating from Dartmouth with honors. Spencer cut an impressive figure in his tailored suits. He was known for his philanthropy, chairing the town's annual charity gala and serving on the board of the local hospital. To the outside world, Spencer appeared to be the very picture of success and respectability. Yet those closest to him saw glimpses of a different man. His assistant, Bethany, noted his increasing distraction over the past year. His golf buddies at the country club commented on his sudden cancellations and vague excuses, and his wife, Laura, had confided in her sister about the growing distance between them. Reed Foster, on the other hand, was just beginning to carve out his place in the world. The son of Laura from her first marriage, Reed had moved with his mother when she married Spencer 7 years ago. Initially a sullen teenager struggling to adjust to small-town life after growing up in Boston, Reed had blossomed in recent years. Reed was popular among his peers. He had just started his junior year at the local community college, studying environmental science. His professors praised his passion and dedication, particularly his work on a project to restore the town's polluted river. Reed's transformation from a troubled teen to a promising young adult had been a source of pride for his mother and, outwardly at least, for his stepfather Spencer. Friends recalled seeing them together at the farmer's market on weekends, chatting animatedly about organic farming practices, but beneath the surface of this seemingly ordinary family dynamic lay currents of tension and desire that would ultimately lead to tragedy. As Detective Sawyer began to piece together the lives of Spencer and Reed, she would uncover a relationship far more complex and intimate than anyone could have imagined. As the early morning mist began to dissipate, Detective Sawyer took charge of the crime scene. Her first order of business was to secure the area and ensure that no evidence was contaminated. She instructed officers to set up a wider perimeter, keeping curious onlookers and the quickly assembling news vans at bay. Sawyer's keen eyes scanned the exterior of the house, noting the absence of any signs of forced entry. The manicured lawn and well-tended flower beds showed no signs of a struggle or hasty exit. Whatever had transpired, it seemed to have been contained within the walls of the Howard home. Donning protective gear, Sawyer entered the house, the scent of copper and something else, fear perhaps, hanging heavy in the air. She made her way to the study, where the bodies had been discovered. The room, with its dark wood paneling and leather-bound books, spoke of old money and tradition. Now it was a tableau of violence. Spencer lay sprawled across his antique desk, a crystal tumbler shattered on the floor beside him. Reed's body was crumpled near the fireplace, arm outstretched as if reaching for something, or someone. Both men were clad only in robes, an odd detail that Sawyer filed away for later consideration. As the forensics team began their meticulous work, photographing and cataloging every detail, Sawyer turned her attention to the rest of the house. She noted the untouched breakfast dishes in the sink, the 2 empty wine glasses on the coffee table in the living room, the rumpled sheets on the bed in the master bedroom. Each seemingly mundane detail could be a crucial piece of the puzzle. Sawyer knew that the key to solving this case lay not just in the physical evidence, but in understanding the complex dynamics of the Howard household. She would need to delve deep into the lives of Spencer, Reed, and Laura to uncover the truth behind this shocking crime. With a nod to her team, Sawyer stepped out onto the front porch. It was time to begin the interviews that would unravel the tangled web of the Howard family's secrets. Spencer and Laura's marriage had been the talk of town 7 years ago. Laura Fosterson, a divorced mother of 1, had swept into town like a breath of fresh air, capturing the heart of the town's most eligible bachelor. Their whirlwind romance culminated in a lavish wedding at the Howard family estate, with the whole town in attendance. Laura, with her vivacious personality and philanthropic interests, seemed the perfect match for Spencer. She threw herself into the role of society wife with gusto, chairing committees and hosting dinner parties. Yet those closest to the couple noticed the strain that began to show in recent years. Laura's sister, Audrey, later told investigators that Laura had confided in her about feeling increasingly isolated in her marriage. Spencer, for his part, had initially embraced his role as stepfather to young Reed. He had taken the boy fishing, attended his soccer games, and even hired tutors to help him improve his grades. But as Reed grew older, the dynamic between stepfather and stepson began to shift in ways that made some observers uncomfortable. Reed's childhood friend recounted an incident from their senior year of high school. She had stopped by the Howard house to pick up Reed for a study session and found him and Spencer in what appeared to be an intense conversation in the study. When they noticed her presence, both had jumped apart, looking flustered. At the time, Zoe had dismissed it as an argument, but in hindsight, she wondered if there had been more to the scene. As Reed matured into a handsome young man, bearing a striking resemblance to his biological father, the tension in the household seemed to increase. Laura, once so close to her son, found herself increasingly shut out of his life. She confided in friends that Reed and Spencer seemed to have their own private world, filled with inside jokes and shared interests that excluded her. The household staff, discreet as they were, couldn't help but notice changes in the family dynamic. The housekeeper, Mrs. Abernathy, recalled overhearing hushed arguments between Laura and Spencer, with Reed's name mentioned more than once. She also noted that Reed had taken to spending more time at the house rather than going out with friends, often sequestered in the study with Spencer for hours on end. As Detective Sawyer pieced together these fragments of the Howard family life, she began to see the outline of a story far more complex than a simple domestic dispute. As the investigation progressed, Detective Sawyer and her team began to peel back the layers of secrecy surrounding the Howard family. Their first breakthrough came from an unexpected source, the family's smart home system. Tech specialist officer Ravi Patel discovered that the house's security cameras, while not covering the interior spaces, had captured some intriguing footage. On the night of the murders, the exterior cameras showed Laura leaving the house at 7:30 p.m., her posture tense and movements hurried. More significantly, the cameras never recorded her return. This discovery led Sawyer to dig deeper into the digital lives of the victims. With a warrant in hand, she tasked Patel with examining the computers and phones belonging to Spencer and Reed. What they found was a treasure trove of hidden communications. On Spencer's work computer, buried deep in encrypted files, was a folder labeled Investments. But instead of financial documents, it contained hundreds of photos of Reed, some innocent, others far more intimate. There were also logs of text conversations between Spencer and Reed, dating back nearly 2 years, filled with coded language and veiled references to secret meetings. Reed's phone yielded even more damning evidence. Hidden behind a secure app disguised as a calculator were dozens of voice messages from Spencer. In these recordings, Spencer's usually confident voice was soft, almost vulnerable as he professed his love for Reed and his torment over their forbidden relationship. As news of these discoveries spread through the police department, officers who had known Spencer for years were left reeling. How could the man they thought they knew, a pillar of the community, a devoted husband, a caring stepfather, have been living such a double life? Witness testimonies began to take on new meaning in light of these revelations. Zoe Lawson's account of the tense scene she had witnessed years ago now seemed like a possible close call, a near discovery of the illicit relationship. Mrs. Abernathy's recollections of hushed arguments and long hours spent in the study painted a picture of a household teetering on the brink of implosion. But perhaps the most chilling piece of evidence came from Reed's best friend, Axel Rodriguez. In a tearful interview, Axel revealed that Reed had confided in him just a week before his death. Reed had been planning to end things with Spencer, saying he couldn't live with the guilt anymore. He had even mentioned the possibility of telling his mother everything. As Detective Sawyer compiled this mountain of evidence, she couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. The secrets unearthed painted a picture of a family torn apart by forbidden passion and looming exposure. But they still didn't answer the most pressing question. Who had killed Spencer and Reed, and why? The first hints of their forbidden attraction could be traced back to a family vacation in the Bahamas. A series of text messages following the trip revealed a growing emotional intimacy between stepfather and stepson, filled with inside jokes and veiled references. Their physical relationship seemed to have started a few months later, coinciding with a period when Laura was away on a 2-week charity mission in Haiti. Spencer and Reed's messages during this time were laden with anticipation and, later, expressions of guilt mixed with declarations of undeniable attraction. From that point on, the affair was conducted with meticulous care to avoid detection. They communicated primarily through encrypted apps, used code words to arrange meetings, and took advantage of Laura's frequent charity engagements to spend time together. Spencer went to great lengths to create opportunities for intimacy. He began working from home more often, citing a need for quiet to focus on important projects. He encouraged Reed to take online classes, ostensibly to save money on commuting, but effectively keeping him closer to home. He even renovated the study, adding soundproofing under the guise of creating a better work environment. To the outside world, their closeness was explained as a heartwarming example of a stepdad and stepson bonding. Spencer took Reed to exclusive social events, introducing him to influential people in the guise of mentorship. But there were close calls. Once, Laura had nearly walked in on them in a compromising position, saved only by the creak of a floorboard that gave them a moment's warning. Another time, a housemaid had found one of Reed's shirts in Spencer's study and questioned its presence, leading Spencer to hastily explain it away as laundry he was planning to donate. As the affair progressed, both Spencer and Reed became increasingly skilled at leading double lives. They maintained their public personas, Spencer the respected businessman and community leader, Reed the promising student and environmental activist, while nurturing their secret passion behind closed doors. But as with all secrets, the weight of their deception was beginning to take its toll, setting the stage for the tragedy that was to come. As the investigation continued, Detective Sawyer turned her attention to Laura Howard. The grieving widow and mother had initially been treated as a victim, But the revelation of the affair between her husband and son cast her in a new light. Sawyer needed to scrutinize Laura's alibi for the night of the murders. Laura claimed she had been at a charity event in Burlington, about an hour's drive from Fairview, on the night in question. She stated that she had left home around 7:30 p.m., attended the gala until midnight, and then stayed overnight at the home of her friend, Cordelia Westbrook, returning to Fairview the following morning to discover the tragic scene. On the surface, her story seemed to check out. Several attendees at the charity gala confirmed seeing Laura there, elegantly dressed and seemingly in good spirits. Cordelia Westbrook corroborated Laura's account of staying the night at her house. However, as Sawyer dug deeper, inconsistencies began to emerge. While Laura had indeed been seen at the gala, no one could confirm her presence after 10:30 p.m. The event photographer's images showed her in the background of several shots early in the evening, but she was noticeably absent from later pictures. Furthermore, cell phone tower data revealed that Laura's phone had pinged off a tower just outside Fairview at 11:45 p.m., contradicting her claim of being in Burlington at that time. When confronted with this information, Laura became flustered, claiming she must have forgotten her phone in the car. Cordelia Westbrook's statement, too, began to unravel under scrutiny. While she maintained that Laura had stayed the night, she couldn't provide any specific details about their interactions that evening or the following morning. These discrepancies in Laura's alibi raised red flags for Sawyer. What had really happened on the night of the murders, and where had Laura Howard truly been? As Detective Sawyer pieced together the events of that fateful night, a chilling narrative began to emerge. Through a combination of forensic evidence, witness statements, and digital footprints, she reconstructed the final hours of Spencer Howard and Reed Foster. The day had begun like any other. Spencer had gone to his office in the morning, while Reed attended classes at the community college. They had exchanged several texts throughout the day, their messages a mix of mundane chat and coded references to their secret relationship. Laura had spent the afternoon preparing for the charity gala, her movements around the house captured by the smart home system. At 7:30 p.m., she left for what she claimed was the event. The exterior cameras recorded her departure, her designer gown glittering in the fading light. Neighbors reported seeing Reed's car pull into the driveway around 8:15 p.m. The smart home system logged the front door opening and closing at 8:17 p.m. From there, the digital breadcrumbs became more scarce but no less telling. At 8:30 p.m., the system recorded music beginning to play in the study, a jazz playlist that both Spencer and Reed favored. The volume was turned up higher than usual, a detail that would later prove significant. Mrs. Abernathy, who lived in the guest house on the property, recalled hearing muffled voices and laughter from the main house around 9 p.m. when she stepped out to water her plants. She thought nothing of it at the time, assuming Spencer was entertaining a business associate. The last digital trace of normalcy came at 9:45 p.m., when Spencer's phone logged a search for a recipe for old-fashioned cocktails. After that, an eerie digital silence fell over the house. It was what happened in the next 2 hours that Sawyer and her team struggled to piece together. The forensic evidence painted a gruesome picture. Both Spencer and Reed had died from multiple stab wounds, but the attacks had occurred in different parts of the study. Spencer was found at his desk, suggesting he had been taken by surprise. Reed, on the other hand, was found near the fireplace, indicating he might have tried to flee or defend himself. The murder weapon, a letter opener from Spencer's desk, was found wiped clean of prints and discarded in the wastebasket. The killer had been methodical, taking time to clean up some of the blood spatter, though they had clearly been interrupted before they could complete the task. Most intriguingly, traces of DNA that didn't belong to either victim were found under Reed's fingernails, suggesting a struggle. This DNA was in the process of being analyzed, but Sawyer had a sinking feeling she knew whose it would turn out to be. The smart home system logged the front door opening and closing again at 11:52 p.m. This coincided with the cell tower ping from Laura's phone just outside of the area. As Sawyer stared at the timeline she had constructed, she couldn't shake the image of Laura Howard, still in her glittering gala gown, stepping back into her home to confront her husband and son. What had she seen? What had driven her to such a violent act? And how had she managed to attend part of the charity event and still return home in time to commit the murders? The answers, Sawyer suspected, lay in the complex web of lies, love, and betrayal that had ensnared the Howard family. As news of the murders spread through residents, the community reeled in shock. The Howard family had been a cornerstone of local society for generations, and the brutal nature of the crimes seemed at odds with the town's peaceful facade. The turning point in the investigation came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. 2 weeks after the murders, Detective Sawyer was reviewing security footage from businesses along the route for the umpteenth time when she noticed something odd. A gas station camera had captured Laura's distinctive red sports car pulling in at 10:15 p.m. on the night of the murders. The timestamp conflicted with Laura's claim of being at the charity gala at that time. More importantly, the footage showed Laura emerging from her car in a state of obvious distress, her elegant gown replaced by a nondescript sweatsuit. Armed with this new evidence, Sawyer obtained a warrant to search Laura's car. The forensics team combed through the vehicle, finding traces of blood in the trunk that matched both Spencer and Reed. Hidden under the spare tire, they discovered a plastic bag containing the gala gown, stained with blood and hastily stuffed away. But the most damning piece of evidence was found in the car's navigation system. It had recorded a route from the charity gala location in Burlington back to Fairview, with a timestamp indicating Laura had left the event much earlier than she had claimed. Confronted with this evidence, Laura's carefully constructed alibi began to crumble. In a tense interrogation, she finally broke down and confessed to the murders. Through tears, Laura revealed that she had suspected the affair between her husband and son for months, but had been in denial. On the night of the gala, she had forgotten her phone and returned home to retrieve it, only to hear sounds coming from the study. Peering through a crack in the door, she had witnessed an intimate moment between Spencer and Reed that confirmed her worst fears. In a state of shock and rage, Laura had quietly left the house and driven to the gala, forcing herself to make an appearance. But as the evening wore on, her emotions overwhelmed her. She left the event early, changed into clothes she kept in her car for emergencies, and returned home to confront Spencer and Reed. The confrontation had quickly escalated into violence. In her fury, Laura had grabbed the letter opener from Spencer's desk and attacked them both. The act had been one of temporary insanity, she claimed, a moment of blind rage at the betrayal she had suffered. With Laura's confession, the case seemed solved. But for Detective Sawyer, the tragedy of the Howard family was far from over. The ripple effects of this crime would be felt in Fairview for years to come. The arrest of Laura Howard sent shockwaves through Fairview. On a crisp morning in early November, residents watched in stunned silence as Detective Sawyer led the woman they had known as a philanthropist and socialite out of the police station in handcuffs. As the date of the trial approached, both the prosecution and defense teams worked tirelessly to build their cases. In her opening statement, District Attorney painted a vivid picture of a woman consumed by jealousy and rage, meticulously planning and executing the murders of her husband and son. She promised the jury that the evidence would show Laura's actions were calculated and deliberate. Jameson Whitaker, in his opening remarks, countered with a portrayal of Laura as a loving wife and mother, whose world had been shattered by an unthinkable betrayal. He asked the jury to consider the immense psychological toll of discovering such a transgression within one's own family. As the trial progressed, a parade of witnesses took the stand. Forensic experts detailed the brutal nature of the attacks, their clinical descriptions causing several jurors to blanch. Detective Sawyer testified about the investigation, her measured responses belying the emotional toll the case had taken on her. The most dramatic moment came when Cordelia Westbrook, Laura's friend and alibi, took the stand. Under intense cross-examination, Cordelia broke down and admitted that Laura had asked her to lie about the night she spent at her house. The revelation sent murmurs rippling through the courtroom, but it was Laura's own testimony that captivated the courtroom. Taking the stand against her lawyer's advice, she spoke in a quiet, trembling voice about the night she discovered Spencer and Reed together. She described the shock, the disbelief, and then the all-consuming rage that had overtaken her. Tears streamed down her face as she recounted the moment she had picked up the letter opener, claiming she had only meant to confront them but lost control. Her anguished description of stabbing the two people she had loved most in the world left many in the courtroom, including some jurors, visibly moved. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned to the packed courtroom. On the charge of first-degree murder for Spencer Howard, the jury found Laura guilty. On the charge of first-degree murder for Reed Foster, the jury found Laura guilty. She sentenced Laura Howard to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As Laura was led away, the Howard family tragedy came to its legal conclusion. But for the town and all those involved, the repercussions would be felt for years to come. Born Madison Marie on April 3, 1985, Madison's childhood was steeped in the idyllic charm of small-town America. Her parents raised her with a blend of love, discipline, and appreciation for the arts. From an early age, Madison displayed a voracious appetite for literature. Her parents nurtured this passion, filling their modest home with books and encouraging Madison's academic pursuits. As she blossomed into a teenager, Madison's intelligence and beauty made her a popular figure at Pine Haven High School, though she often preferred the company of books to that of her peers. It was during her senior year that Madison met Caspian Alwyn, a charismatic transfer student with dreams of becoming a journalist. Caspian's quick wit and shared love of literature quickly captured Madison's heart. Their whirlwind romance became the talk of the town, with many predicting a bright future for the young couple. After graduating high school, Madison and Caspian both attended the University of Oregon. Madison pursued a degree in library science, while Caspian studied journalism. Their college years were marked by late-night study sessions, passionate debates about literature, and dreams of a life filled with adventure and intellectual pursuits. Upon graduation, the couple returned to Pine Haven. Madison secured a position at the local library, quickly working her way up to head librarian. Caspian, however, struggled to find fulfilling work in the small town. His dreams of becoming an investigative journalist seemed increasingly out of reach in the quiet confines of Pine Haven. On a crisp autumn day, Madison and Caspian exchanged vows in a picturesque ceremony at the Pine Haven Community Church. The entire town turned out to celebrate the union of two of its brightest young stars. For a time, it seemed that Madison had achieved the perfect life, a fulfilling career, a loving husband, and the respect of her community. But as the years passed, cracks began to appear in the facade of their perfect marriage. Caspian grew restless and resentful, feeling trapped in Pine Haven. Madison, devoted to her work in her hometown, couldn't understand his discontent. The couple's once vibrant conversations devolved into tense silences and bitter arguments. Little did Madison know that this first taste of marital discord was merely a prelude to the turmoil that lay ahead. The unraveling of Madison and Caspian's marriage was a slow, painful process that played out over the course of 2 years. Caspian's frustration with small-town life and his unfulfilled ambitions led him to become increasingly withdrawn and irritable. He began spending more time at the local bar, drowning his sorrows and lamenting his unrealized dreams to anyone who would listen. Madison, for her part, threw herself into her work at the library, organizing reading programs for children and spearheading a digital archiving project for the town's historical documents. She clung to the hope that if she could just make their life in Pine Haven perfect enough, Caspian would rediscover his love for her and their shared life. The breaking point came in the spring of 2013, when Caspian announced that he had accepted a junior reporter position at a small newspaper in Seattle. He delivered this news not with excitement, but with a sense of grim finality. "Madison, we're done here. I can't do this anymore. I'm suffocating in this town and I won't let it kill my dreams." Madison was devastated. She pleaded with Caspian to reconsider, to give their marriage another chance. But his mind was made up. Within a week, he had packed his belongings and left Pine Haven, leaving Madison alone in the house they had once hoped to fill with children and laughter. The divorce proceedings were mercifully quick, but the emotional toll on Madison was immense. She retreated into herself, finding solace in her books and her work. The once vivacious woman became a shadow of her former self, her smile now tinged with sadness, her eyes carrying the weight of her heartbreak. For 2 years, Madison lived in a state of emotional limbo, going through the motions of her daily life while nursing the wounds of her failed marriage. Little did she know that fate was about to deal her another hand, one that would lead her down a path she could never have imagined. It was on a rain-soaked Tuesday in April 2015 that Silas Qualley first walked into the Pine Haven Public Library. With his tall frame, Silas cut an impressive figure. He approached Madison's desk with a warm smile, introducing himself as the new high school English teacher. Silas had recently moved to Pine Haven from Portland, seeking a change of pace after the end of his own long-term relationship. As he and Madison began to discuss their shared love of literature, a spark of connection ignited between them. For the first time in years, Madison felt the flutter of excitement in her chest. Over the following weeks, Silas became a regular at the library, often staying until closing time to chat with Madison. Their conversations ranged from passionate debates about the merits of various authors to quiet confidences about their past relationships and hopes for the future. Silas's gentle humor and obvious admiration began to chip away at the walls Madison had built around her heart. The whirlwind romance that followed was the talk of the town. Madison bloomed under Silas's attention, regaining the vibrancy that had dimmed during her years with Caspian. Silas, for his part, seemed utterly devoted to Madison, showering her with affection and romantic gestures. Just 6 months after their first meeting, Silas proposed on the very same spot in the park where they had their first date. Madison, caught up in the intoxicating rush of new love, accepted without hesitation. The couple married in a small, intimate ceremony at the Pinehaven Botanical Gardens, with Madison's parents and a handful of close friends in attendance. As Madison and Silas exchanged vows, promising to love and cherish each other for better or worse, neither could have foreseen the storms that lay ahead. For Madison, it seemed that life had given her a second chance at happiness, but fate, as she would learn, had other plans. The first 2 years of Madison and Silas's marriage seemed to be plucked from the pages of a romance novel. They settled into a charming home on Maple Street, just a short walk from both the library and the high school. Weekends were filled with antiquing trips to neighboring towns, cozy evenings spent reading aloud to each other, and dinner parties with their growing circle of friends. Silas quickly became a beloved figure at Pinehaven High School, his innovative teaching methods and genuine interest in his students earning him the admiration of both pupils and parents alike. Madison beamed with pride whenever she heard people praising her husband's dedication and charm. At home, Silas was attentive and affectionate. He surprised Madison with breakfast in bed on Sunday mornings, left little love notes in her lunch bag, and never failed to ask about her day. To the outside world, they appeared to be the perfect couple, a shining example of mature, devoted love. Yet, as the initial glow of their honeymoon phase began to fade, subtle signs of discord started to emerge. Silas began to work later hours, citing the need to prepare for his classes and grade papers. While Madison initially accepted this as part of his commitment to his job, she couldn't help but feel a twinge of loneliness on the nights when she ate dinner alone. There were other small changes, too. Silas became more protective of his phone, often taking calls in another room or quickly putting it away when Madison entered. He started going to the gym more frequently, paying increased attention to his appearance. When Madison commented on these changes, Silas brushed off her concerns with a laugh and a kiss. Despite these niggling doubts, Madison was determined to believe in the strength of their relationship. She threw herself into being the perfect wife, planning elaborate date nights and surprising Silas with thoughtful gifts. If she sometimes felt that his responses to her efforts were a bit forced, she pushed those thoughts aside, chalking it up to the natural ebb and flow of married life. As their third wedding anniversary approached, Madison began to plan a special surprise for Silas, a romantic weekend getaway to the Oregon coast. Little did she know that this trip would set in motion a chain of events that would shatter her world and push her to the very limits of her sanity. It was at the start of the new school year, just a few weeks before their planned anniversary trip, that Lachlan Frost entered their lives. Lachlan, a new biology teacher at Pinehaven High, arrived from Australia with an easy smile and a laid-back charm that immediately endeared him to both students and faculty. Lachlan stood out in the small town like an exotic bird among sparrows. His Australian accent and penchant for colorful storytelling made him an instant hit in the teacher's lounge. Silas and Lachlan hit it off immediately, bonding over their shared love of literature and their experiences as relative newcomers to Pinehaven. They began having lunch together regularly, and soon Silas was inviting Lachlan over for dinner or drinks after school. At first, Madison was pleased to see her husband forming a close friendship. Silas had always been more introverted, and she hoped that Lachlan's outgoing nature might help bring him out of his shell. She enjoyed the lively conversations that filled their home when Lachlan visited, and the way Silas seemed more animated in his presence. However, as the weeks passed, Madison began to notice a shift in the dynamics. Silas and Lachlan seemed to share inside jokes that she wasn't privy to. More concerning were the frequent text messages and phone calls between the two men. Silas's phone would buzz constantly with notifications, and he would often step out of the room to take calls from Lachlan, his voice low and intimate. When Madison casually mentioned these observations to Silas, he dismissed her concerns with a wave of his hand. "Lachlan's just going through a tough time adjusting to life here," he explained. "He needs a friend, that's all." Madison tried to quell the unease growing in the pit of her stomach. She told herself she was being paranoid, that she was projecting her past hurts onto her current relationship. But as Silas and Lachlan's friendship continued to deepen, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. As autumn leaves began to fall and a chill crept into the air, Madison's suspicions grew like shadows at dusk. The late nights at the office became more frequent, with Silas often not returning home until well after midnight. When she asked about these late hours, his explanations became increasingly vague and defensive. One evening, as Silas slept, Madison's curiosity got the better of her. With trembling hands, she picked up his phone from the nightstand. To her surprise, it wasn't locked. As she scrolled through his messages, her heart sank. The exchanges between Silas and Lachlan were filled with flirtatious banter and thinly veiled innuendos. There were references to secret meetings and passionate encounters that made Madison's cheeks burn with a mixture of embarrassment and rage. Confronted with this evidence the next morning, Silas vehemently denied any wrongdoing. "It's just how mates talk in Australia," he insisted. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it grew with each passing day. Madison began to pay closer attention to the way Silas and Lachlan interacted when they were together. She noticed the lingering touches, the meaningful glances, the way their bodies seemed to gravitate towards each other in a room. Little did anyone know that behind Madison's increasingly stoic exterior, a plan was forming, a plan that would lead to a night of irreversible consequences. On a chilly Friday evening in late November, Madison made a decision that would alter the course of her life forever. Silas had told her he would be working late again, collaborating with Lachlan on their mysterious project, but something in his voice, a slight tremor of anticipation perhaps, set off alarm bells in Madison's mind. After pacing the house for hours, her suspicions gnawing at her like a hungry beast, Madison grabbed her car keys and drove to the high school. The parking lot was empty save for two vehicles, Silas's sleek black sedan and Lachlan's rugged SUV. With her heart pounding, Madison made her way to Silas's classroom. As she approached, she heard muffled voices and what sounded like laughter. Steeling herself, she peered through the small window in the door. The scene that greeted her eyes would be forever seared into her memory. Silas and Lachlan were locked in a passionate embrace, their lips meeting in a kiss that left no doubt about the true nature of their relationship. Madison watched, frozen in shock, as her husband's hands roamed Lachlan's body with a familiarity that spoke of long-standing intimacy. For several agonizing minutes, Madison stood there, unable to look away from the tableau of betrayal before her. She watched as Silas and Lachlan broke apart, their faces flushed and eyes bright with desire. She heard snippets of their conversation, words of love and promises of a future together that cut her to the core. Finally, as the reality of the situation crashed over her like a tidal wave, Madison stumbled back from the door. She made her way out of the school on unsteady legs, her mind reeling from what she had witnessed. The drive home passed in a blur, tears streaming down her face as she gripped the steering wheel with white-knuckled hands. Back at the house, Madison moved as if in a trance. She poured herself a large glass of red wine, draining it in quick, desperate gulps before pouring another. As the alcohol coursed through her system, the initial shock began to give way to a burning rage. As the night wore on, Madison's anger and pain continued to build. She thought about confronting Silas when he returned home, but the idea of facing him, of hearing his excuses and lies, was more than she could bear. Instead, she began to formulate a plan, a way to make Silas and Lachlan pay for the pain they had caused her. Little did Madison know that her actions in the coming hours would not only destroy the lives of Silas and Lachlan, but would also set her on a path from which there would be no return. In the days following her discovery, Madison moved through her life like a ghost, going through the motions of her daily routine, while her mind churned with a toxic mix of grief, rage, and betrayal. She maintained a facade of normalcy, smiling brittle smiles at patrons in the library and exchanging pleasantries with neighbors, all while a storm brewed within her. Silas, oblivious to the fact that his secret had been uncovered, continued his charade of the devoted husband. His attempts at affection now made Madison's skin crawl, each kiss and caress feeling like a fresh betrayal. She found herself studying him when he thought she wasn't looking, searching for signs of the stranger he had become. At night, Madison lay awake, replaying the scene she had witnessed in the classroom over and over in her mind. She imagined confronting Silas, fantasized about exposing his infidelity to the entire town, but something held her back, a combination of shame, fear, and a deep-seated desire for revenge that was slowly taking root in her heart. As the weekend approached, Madison made a decision. She would confront Silas and Lachlan, force them to face the consequences of their actions. What she didn't realize was that this confrontation would spiral out of control in ways she could never have anticipated. Saturday, December 7th dawned cold and gray, a fitting backdrop for the tragedy that was about to unfold. Madison woke early, her head pounding from the previous night's excesses, her heart heavy with the weight of her planned confrontation. As evening approached, Madison put her plan into motion. She told Silas she was going to visit her parents for dinner, knowing full well that he would seize the opportunity to invite Lachlan over. With a kiss on the cheek that felt like acid on her skin, she left the house, driving aimlessly around town for hours as she steeled herself for what was to come. At 9:30 p.m., Madison parked her car a block away from the house and approached on foot. Through the living room window, she could see Silas and Lachlan on the couch, their bodies close, heads bent in intimate conversation. The sight sent a fresh wave of pain and anger coursing through her. Taking a deep breath, Madison entered the house quietly. She could hear Silas and Lachlan's voices drifting from the living room, punctuated by soft laughter. With trembling hands, she reached into her purse and pulled out the small handgun she had taken from her father's collection earlier that week. As she stepped into the living room, time seemed to slow down. Silas and Lachlan looked up, their expressions shifting from surprise to fear as they registered the gun in Madison's hand. Silas stood up slowly, his hands raised in a placating gesture. Madison was beyond talking. Months of pain, betrayal, and pent-up rage exploded out of her in a torrent of accusations and obscenities. She screamed at them, demanding to know how long they had been lying to her, how they could have betrayed her so callously. What happened next occurred in a matter of seconds, but to Madison, it felt like an eternity. As Silas took a step towards her, perhaps intending to disarm her, Madison's finger tightened on the trigger. The first shot caught Silas in the chest, the impact throwing him backward onto the couch. Before she could fully register what she had done, Madison turned the gun on Lachlan, firing twice in rapid succession. The room fell silent, save for the ringing in Madison's ears and the ragged sound of her own breathing. Silas lay motionless on the couch, a dark stain spreading across his shirt. Lachlan was slumped on the floor, his eyes open but unseeing. As the reality of what she had done began to sink in, Madison dropped the gun, her legs giving way beneath her. She sank to the floor, her mind struggling to process the scene before her. In a matter of moments, she had destroyed not only the lives of Silas and Lachlan, but her own as well. Outside, a neighbor who had heard the gunshots was already calling 911, setting in motion the final act of this tragic story. The wail of sirens pierced the night air as police cars and ambulances converged on the residence. Neighbors in pajamas and robes gathered on the street, watching in shock as the drama unfolded before them. Madison offered no resistance as the police entered the house, finding her still sitting on the floor of the living room, her vacant gaze fixed on the lifeless bodies of Silas and Lachlan. She was handcuffed and led to a waiting police car, her face a mask of stunned disbelief. As word of the shooting spread through Pinehaven, the town was plunged into a state of collective shock and grief. The community that had once viewed Madison and Silas as the perfect couple now grappled with the violent reality that had shattered that illusion. The investigation into the double homicide was swift and thorough. Forensic teams combed through the home, collecting evidence that would later be presented at trial. Madison's fingerprints on the gun, gunshot residue on her hands, and the testimony of neighbors who had heard the shots left little doubt about her guilt in the physical act of the killings. However, as the case progressed, a more complex picture began to emerge. Interviews with Madison's friends and family painted a portrait of a woman who had been deeply wronged and pushed to her breaking point. The defense team, led by prominent criminal attorney Veronica Sloan, began to build a case around temporary insanity and extreme emotional distress. Prosecution witnesses included forensic experts who detailed the ballistics evidence, and the brutality of the killings. But it was the testimony of those who knew the parties involved that proved most compelling. Former colleagues of Silas and Lachlan spoke of the obvious chemistry between the two men and of Madison's increasing isolation in the months leading up to the shooting. The defense called a series of expert witnesses, including psychologists, who testified to Madison's fragile mental state and the extreme emotional trauma caused by discovering her husband's affair. Madison's own testimony was a pivotal moment in the trial. In a voice barely above a whisper, she recounted the night she discovered Silas and Lachlan together and the overwhelming emotions that had driven her to violence. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned with their verdict. In a packed courtroom, with tension so thick it could be cut with a knife, the foreman stood to deliver their decision. On the charge of first-degree murder for the death of Silas Qualley, the jury found Madison Plemons guilty of the lesser charge of second-degree murder. For the death of Lachlan Frost, they again returned a verdict of guilty on the charge of second-degree murder. At the sentencing hearing 2 weeks later, Judge had the unenviable task of determining Madison's fate. After hearing impassioned pleas from both the prosecution and defense, as well as impact statements from the families of Silas and Lachlan, the judge rendered her decision. Taking into account the circumstances of the crime and Madison's lack of prior criminal history, Judge Blackwell sentenced her to 20 years to life for each count, to be served concurrently. Madison would be eligible for parole after serving a minimum of 20 years. As Madison was led from the courtroom, the tragic saga that had gripped Pine Haven and the nation for months finally came to a close. At the heart of this tale are 3 individuals whose paths would become inextricably intertwined. Alton Rhodes, the 19-year-old young man whose charm would prove both irresistible and destructive. Mandy Carell, a neglected wife yearning for passion. And Delilah Frost, a recent divorcee seeking to reclaim her sense of self. Their story would ultimately lead to a shocking act of violence that would forever change the face of the community, leaving its residents to question how well they truly knew their neighbors. At just 19, Alton Rhodes exuded a confidence and maturity that belied his years. Standing at 6 feet tall, he turned heads wherever he went. But it wasn't just his looks that drew people in. Alton possessed a magnetic personality that made everyone feel special in his presence. Raised by a single mother who worked long hours as a nurse, Alton had learned early on to fend for himself. He'd developed a knack for reading people, understanding their needs and desires sometimes before they did themselves. This skill served him well in his part-time job as a barista at the local coffee shop, where he quickly became a favorite among the regulars. Alton had moved to Redwood just a month after graduating high school, eager to strike out on his own. His mother had reconnected with an old friend in the area who offered Alton the place to stay while he figured out his next steps. He had vague plans of attending community college, but for now he was content to work and enjoy his newfound freedom. The young man's arrival in the neighborhood didn't go unnoticed. Women of all ages found excuses to visit the coffee shop during his shifts. While men grudgingly admired his easy charm, Alton took it all in stride, flashing his dimpled smile and engaging in friendly banter with everyone who crossed his path. But it was his encounters with his immediate neighbors that would set in motion a chain of events no one could have predicted. On one side of his temporary home lived the Carells, an outwardly perfect couple whose carefully maintained image hid a crumbling marriage. On the other side resided Delilah Frost, a woman in her early 40s struggling to rebuild her life after a bitter divorce. Alton's first meeting with Mandy Carell occurred on a sunny Saturday morning as he was mowing the lawn. She had come over to welcome him to the neighborhood, bearing a plate of homemade cookies. Their eyes met, and for a moment time seemed to stand still. Little did either of them know that this innocent encounter would be the first step down a dangerous path. Mandy Carell appeared to have it all: a successful husband, a beautiful home, and the envy of her peers. But behind closed doors, her life was far from perfect. Married for 15 years to Gregory, a prominent surgeon, Mandy had slowly watched the passion and intimacy drain from their relationship. Mandy had once been vivacious and ambitious, with dreams of becoming a renowned artist. However, as Gregory's career flourished, she found herself relegated to the role of trophy wife, expected to maintain their home and social status, while her own aspirations withered. Her paintings, once filled with vibrant colors and raw emotion, now gathered dust in a forgotten corner of their basement. The first time Mandy laid eyes on Alton, she felt a spark she thought had long since died. His youthful energy and genuine interest in her thoughts and feelings awakened something within her. She found herself making excuses to be outside when he was around, carefully selecting her outfits and rediscovering her makeup collection. Their interaction started innocently enough. Mandy would bring over baked goods or offer gardening advice, lingering longer each time to chat. Alton, in turn, seemed genuinely interested in her life and experiences. He asked about her artwork, and his enthusiasm rekindled her passion for painting. One evening, as Gregory was working late yet again, Mandy invited Alton over to see her old paintings. As they stood in the dim light of the basement, surrounded by canvases that told the story of her faded dreams, something shifted between them. Alton's hand brushed against hers, and Mandy felt a jolt of electricity course through her body. She turned to face him, her heart pounding. Alton's eyes searched hers, asking a silent question. In that moment, all the years of neglect and loneliness culminated in a desperate need for connection. Mandy leaned in, and their lips met in a kiss that would change everything. As she pulled away, breathless and conflicted, Mandy knew she was standing on the precipice of a decision that could unravel her entire life. But the fire that Alton had ignited within her was too strong to ignore. For the first time in years, she felt alive, desired and seen. At 42 years old, Delilah Frost was starting over. After 20 years of marriage, she had finally found the courage to leave her emotionally abusive husband. The divorce had been finalized just 3 months before Alton moved in next door, leaving Delilah raw and vulnerable. Once a confident and outgoing woman, years of criticism and manipulation had eroded Delilah's self-esteem. She second-guessed every decision. From her choice of clothing to her career moves, the divorce had drained her financially and emotionally, forcing her to downsize from the lavish home she once shared with her ex-husband to the modest house in Redwood. Delilah's first encounter with Alton came on a rainy afternoon when she was struggling to carry groceries from her car. Without hesitation, he rushed over to help, flashing a warm smile that made her feel seen for the first time in years. As they chatted while putting away her groceries, Delilah found herself opening up about her recent divorce and the challenges of rebuilding her life. To her surprise, Alton listened without judgment, offering words of encouragement and support. His youthful optimism was infectious, and Delilah found herself smiling more than she had in months. Before he left, Alton suggested they have coffee sometime, an invitation that both thrilled and terrified her. In the days that followed, Delilah found herself looking forward to their casual encounters. She began taking evening walks, timing them to coincide with Alton's return from work. They would often stop to chat, and Delilah relished the way Alton made her feel, not as a broken, middle-aged divorcee, but as a woman with value and appeal. Their friendship deepened quickly. Alton showed genuine interest in Delilah's work as a freelance graphic designer, even offering to help her build a website to attract more clients. His belief in her abilities reignited her passion for her career, and she found herself taking on new projects with renewed confidence. One night, as they sat on Delilah's porch sharing a bottle of wine, the air between them charged with unspoken tension. Alton's hand brushed against hers, and Delilah felt a rush of desire she thought she'd never experience again. When he leaned in to kiss her, she didn't hesitate. In that moment, all her doubts and insecurities melted away, replaced by a burning need to feel alive and wanted once more. As summer gave way to fall, Alton found himself entangled in 2 passionate affairs, each filling a different void in his life. With Mandy, he experienced a depth of emotion and intellectual connection he had never known before. Their clandestine meetings were filled with intense discussions about art, life, and dreams, interspersed with moments of fiery passion. Mandy's neglected talents flourished under Alton's admiration, and she began painting again with renewed vigor. Delilah, on the other hand, offered Alton a sense of nurturing and stability he had always craved. Their time together was marked by comfort and easy laughter, with Delilah's confidence growing stronger with each encounter. Alton found himself playing the role of supportive partner, encouraging her career ambitions and helping her rediscover her self-worth. The young man rationalized his behavior, convincing himself that he was helping both women find happiness and fulfillment. He skillfully juggled his time between them, using his job at the coffee shop and fictitious study groups as covers for his rendezvous. Mandy reveled in the secret thrill of her affair, feeling more alive than she had in years. She threw herself into her art, producing a series of abstract paintings that pulsed with newfound passion and energy. Her renewed zest for life didn't go unnoticed by her husband Gregory, who attributed the change to a new fitness routine Mandy had ostensibly started. Meanwhile, Delilah blossomed under Alton's attention. Her wardrobe underwent a transformation, reflecting her growing confidence. Friends remarked on the positive change in her demeanor, assuming she had finally moved on from her painful divorce. As weeks turned into months, both women grew increasingly attached to Alton. Mandy began to fantasize about leaving her loveless marriage, imagining a future where she could pursue her art freely with Alton by her side. Delilah, having experienced the pain of a failed marriage, was more cautious but couldn't help dreaming of a fresh start with someone who truly appreciated her. Alton, for his part, became more deeply enmeshed in the web of deceit he had woven. He cared for both women and found himself unable to choose between them. The excitement of his double life began to wear thin, replaced by a constant state of anxiety and guilt. One crisp autumn evening, as Alton lay in Mandy's arms in the secret studio she had set up in her basement, she whispered words that sent a chill down his spine. "I think I'm falling in love with you." Later that same night, in Delilah's warm kitchen, she gazed at him over a cup of tea and confessed that he made her believe in love again. As Alton walked home in the dark, the weight of his actions finally began to sink in. He realized that what had started as harmless flirtation had grown into something far more complex and potentially destructive. Little did he know, the delicate balance he had been maintaining was about to come crashing down, with consequences more dire than he could have ever imagined. As autumn progressed, Alton's double life became increasingly difficult to maintain. The thrill of secret rendezvous was replaced by a constant state of anxiety and hypervigilance. Every text message, every phone call, every casual encounter in the neighborhood became a potential minefield that could expose his deception. Alton developed an elaborate system of alibis and excuses. He cited increased hours at the coffee shop, fictitious study groups for classes he wasn't taking, and non-existent volunteer work to account for his time. His phone became a source of both connection and dread, carefully managed with separate conversations and meticulously deleted message threads. The pressure began to take its toll on Alton, and his once easy smile became strained. Co-workers at the coffee shop noticed his distraction, attributing it to the stress of balancing work and school. In reality, Alton spent every moment terrified that his carefully constructed house of cards would come tumbling down. There were close calls that left Alton's heart racing. One afternoon, he was walking hand in hand with Delilah in a nearby park when he spotted Mandy in the distance. He quickly steered Delilah in the opposite direction, inventing a sudden craving for ice cream to explain their abrupt change of course. Another time, Alton was helping Mandy carry groceries into her house when Delilah drove by. He ducked behind Mandy's car, pretending to tie his shoe, praying that Delilah hadn't noticed him. The incident left him shaken, realizing how easily his deception could be exposed. As Mandy and Delilah grew more attached, they began to demand more of Alton's time and attention. Mandy, emboldened by her rediscovered passion for art and life, started to talk about leaving her husband. She painted vivid pictures of a future with Alton, filled with love and creative pursuits. These conversations left Alton simultaneously exhilarated and terrified, unsure of how to respond to such earnest declarations, given their age differences. Delilah, while more cautious about jumping into a serious relationship, began to integrate Alton into her life in subtle ways. She introduced him to her friends as her young neighbor, but the affectionate glances and inside jokes they shared spoke volumes. She started making plans for the holidays, hinting at wanting Alton to meet her family. The women's growing expectations added another layer of complexity to Alton's already precarious situation. He found himself making conflicting promises, agreeing to holiday plans with both women, and knowing he would inevitably disappoint one or both of them. As the pressure mounted, Alton's guilt began to manifest physically. He lost weight, his sleep was plagued by nightmares, and he developed a nervous tic, constantly checking his phone and glancing over his shoulder. He knew he needed to end at least one of the affairs, but the thought of hurting either woman was unbearable. What Alton failed to realize was that his increasingly erratic behavior was not going unnoticed. Both Mandy and Delilah, initially blinded by their feelings for him, were beginning to sense that something was amiss. The stage was set for a confrontation that would shatter the delicate balance Alton had been struggling to maintain. The facade Alton had so carefully constructed came crashing down on a chilly November evening. The annual festival was in full swing, with residents gathering in the town square for food, games, and live music. Alton had agonized over whether to attend, knowing both Mandy and Delilah would be there. In the end, he decided that his absence would be more suspicious than his presence. As Alton navigated through the crowd, he felt like walking on a tightrope. He exchanged pleasant greetings with neighbors, all the while scanning the area for signs of Mandy or Delilah. He had just begun to relax, thinking he might make it through the evening unscathed, when disaster struck. Mandy, who had been volunteering at the face-painting booth, spotted Alton and waved him over enthusiastically. As he reluctantly approached, he saw Delilah at a nearby table, arranging items for the silent auction. Time seemed to slow down as Alton watched the two women, oblivious to each other's significance, moving towards an inevitable collision. Mandy reached Alton first, greeting him with a warm hug that lingered a bit too long for mere neighbors. As she pulled away, her eyes shining with affection, Delilah appeared at Alton's side. The younger man felt the blood drain from his face as the two women sized each other up, confusion slowly giving way to suspicion. An awkward silence fell over the trio, broken only when Mandy, ever the gracious hostess, extended her hand to Delilah and introduced herself. Delilah reciprocated, her eyes darting between Mandy and Alton, noting the familiar way Mandy's hand rested on Alton's arm. The conversation that followed was a masterclass in subtext and veiled accusations. Both women, drawing on their intuition and the subtle signs they had previously dismissed, began to piece together the truth. They spoke of their close friendship with Alton, each anecdote carefully chosen to stake their claim. Alton stood frozen between them, watching helplessly as his carefully compartmentalized worlds collided. He opened his mouth several times to speak, but no words came out. His silence only served to confirm the growing suspicions of both women. The tension reached a breaking point when Mandy, her voice tight with barely controlled emotion, mentioned a unique bracelet she had given Alton, a bracelet that was at that very moment visible on his wrist. In that moment, the full extent of Alton's deception became clear to both women. Mandy's face crumpled, tears welling in her eyes, while Delilah's expression hardened into one of cold fury. Without another word, both women turned and walked away, leaving Alton standing alone, the weight of his actions finally crashing down upon him. The fallout was immediate and severe. As Mandy and Delilah stormed off in opposite directions, whispers began to circulate through the festival crowd. Neighbors who had witnessed the tense exchange began to speculate, and soon the gossip spread like wildfire through Redwood. Alton, overwhelmed by the sudden exposure of his deceit, fled the festival. He spent the night pacing in his room, alternating between frantically trying to call both women and collapsing in fits of remorse and self-recrimination. The following days were a blur of confrontations and accusations. Mandy showed up at Alton's door the next morning, her eyes red-rimmed from a sleepless night. Her quiet devastation was more painful to Alton than any angry outburst could have been. She spoke of betrayal, of shattered trust, and of the love she thought they had shared. When she left, Alton knew that something irreparable had broken between them. Delilah's reaction was markedly different. She refused to answer Alton's calls or texts, instead sending a scathing email that laid bare all of his lies and manipulations. Her words, sharp as knives, cut through any remaining illusions Alton had about the nobility of his actions. She made it clear that he was never to contact her again. As news of the affair spread, Alton found himself ostracized by the community he had so easily charmed just months before. Dirty looks and whispered comments followed him whenever he ventured out. His shifts at the coffee shop became exercises in endurance as he faced the judgment and curiosity of customers who had once adored him. But the worst was yet to come. 1 week after the festival, Alton received a visit from Gregory Carell, Mandy's husband. The normally composed surgeon was trembling with barely contained rage as he confronted Alton about the affair. It was clear that the exposure of Mandy's infidelity had shattered the Carells' already fragile marriage. As the dust began to settle, Alton was left to face the consequences of his actions. He had not only broken the hearts of 2 women, but it also disrupted the lives of everyone around them. The once peaceful neighborhood of Redwood had been irrevocably changed, its residents forced to confront the reality that even in their idyllic suburb, passion and deception could lead to devastating consequences. In the weeks following the revelation at the Harvest Festival, the two women, once friendly neighbors, now avoided each other at all costs, their shared humiliation and anger creating an invisible barrier between them. Mandy's life spiraled into chaos. Her husband, Gregory, oscillated between cold fury and desperate attempts to salvage their marriage. Their arguments, once confined to hushed tones behind closed doors, now spilled out into the open. Neighbors pretended not to notice, as shouting matches echoed through the Carell's usually quiet home. Mandy threw herself into her art with a frenetic energy, producing dark, turbulent pieces that reflected her inner turmoil. She spent hours locked in her studio, emerging only to face the wreckage of her personal life. Her once pristine appearance became disheveled, her eyes hollow with grief and lack of sleep. Delilah, on the other hand, retreated into herself. She worked from home, avoiding the pitying glances and whispered comments of her neighbors. Her brief period of renewed confidence shattered. She found herself slipping back into the insecurities that had plagued her after her divorce. Clients noticed a decline in the quality of her work, and several took their business elsewhere. As the initial shock wore off, the women's pain began to transmute into anger, not just at Alton but at each other. They began to see each other as rivals, each blaming the other for the destruction of their relationship with Alton and the upheaval in their lives. The tension between them came to a head one afternoon at the local supermarket. Mandy and Delilah found themselves face to face in the produce section, their shopping carts colliding in a jarring metaphor for their collided lives. What started as terse apologies quickly escalated into a heated exchange of accusations and insults. Delilah, her voice shaking with emotion, accused Mandy of using Alton to escape her loveless marriage. Mandy retaliated by insinuating that Delilah's desperation had made her an easy target for Alton's manipulation. The argument grew louder, drawing the attention of other shoppers, until a store manager was forced to intervene. The incident at the supermarket marked a turning point. What had been a private scandal became a public spectacle, dividing the community of Redwood. People began to take sides, some sympathizing with Mandy's marital struggles, others relating to Delilah's vulnerability as a divorcee. The women found themselves at the center of a maelstrom of gossip and judgment. As the conflict between Mandy and Delilah intensified, Alton became an almost forgotten figure in the drama. He had retreated from public life, rarely leaving his house except to go to work. When he did venture out, he kept his head down, avoiding eye contact with anyone he passed. But the young man's attempt to fade into the background would prove futile. Unbeknownst to him, his actions had set in motion a chain of events that would culminate in a tragedy no one could have foreseen. The simmering tensions between Mandy and Delilah were about to boil over, with devastating consequences for everyone involved. The morning of November 15th dawned cold and gray, a fitting backdrop for the tragedy that was about to unfold. Across the street, Delilah Frost was awake, staring at her computer screen as she tried to focus on a project due later that day. Her work, once a source of pride and fulfillment, now felt hollow. She found herself constantly distracted by thoughts of Alton, of Mandy, of the life she had briefly thought might be possible before it all came crashing down. The catalyst for the day's events came in the form of a simple email. Delilah, in a moment of weakness, had decided to reach out to Alton. Her message was brief, a request to meet, to find some closure on their relationship. She hit send before she could second-guess herself, unaware of the chain reaction she had just set in motion. Mandy, who had taken to checking Alton's email, his password unchanged from when they were lovers, saw the message pop up in his inbox. Something inside her snapped. The thought of Alton and Delilah rekindling their relationship, of being left behind while they moved on together, was more than she could bear. In a haze of jealousy and pain, Mandy made her way to Gregory's study. She knew he kept a handgun in his desk drawer, a precaution he'd taken after a series of break-ins in the neighborhood years ago. With shaking hands, she retrieved the weapon, its weight unfamiliar and terrifying in her grasp. Meanwhile, Delilah had decided to clear her head with a walk. The crisp autumn air bit at her cheeks as she made her way down the street, lost in thought. She was so distracted that she didn't notice Mandy approaching until it was too late. Mandy confronted Delilah on the sidewalk, her words a jumble of accusations and grief. Neighbors would later recount hearing raised voices, the sound of an argument escalating rapidly. Talila, caught off guard by Mandy's sudden appearance in evident distress, tried to calm the situation, her hands raised in a placating gesture. What happened next would be pieced together from eyewitness accounts and forensic evidence. In her heightened emotional state, Mandy produced the gun. Whether she intended to use it or merely to threaten is unclear. Talila, seeing the weapon, made a move, either to disarm Mandy or to flee. A single shot rang out, shattering the morning quiet of Redwood. Talila crumpled to the ground, a bloom of red spreading across her chest. Mandy stood frozen, the gun slipping from her nerveless fingers to clatter on the sidewalk. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then chaos erupted. Neighbors, drawn by the sound of the gunshot, rushed from their homes. Someone called 911, while others attempted to render first aid to the fallen Delilah. Mandy remained rooted to the spot, her face a mask of shock and horror, as the reality of what she had done began to sink in. By the time police and paramedics arrived, it was too late. Talila Frost was pronounced dead at the scene, her life extinguished in a moment of passion and madness. Mandy offered no resistance as she was led away in handcuffs, her blank stare and tear-streaked face a stark contrast to the vibrant, confident woman she had been just months before. As news of the shooting spread, the residents of Redwood were left to grapple with the shocking turn of events. The idyllic facade of their neighborhood had been irreparably shattered, leaving in its wake a community forever changed by tragedy. The police investigation moved swiftly, with multiple witnesses and Mandy Carell's immediate surrender. There was little mystery surrounding the events of that fateful morning. However, as detectives dug deeper, they uncovered a complex web of relationships and emotions that had led to the tragic outcome. Gregory Carell, Mandy's husband, found himself thrust into an impossible situation. As a prominent member of the community, he was now faced with the public humiliation of his wife's infidelity, coupled with the horror of her actions. He retreated from public life, taking a leave of absence from the hospital where he worked. The investigation also brought to light the extent of Mandy's emotional distress in the weeks leading up to the shooting. Friends and neighbors, previously hesitant to get involved, now came forward with accounts of her erratic behavior and apparent mental decline. These revelations would later play a crucial role in her legal defense. Talila Frost's family arrived from out of state, shell-shocked and grieving. As the investigation progressed, attention turned to the weapon used in the shooting. The gun, legally registered to Gregory Carell, had been improperly stored, raising questions about his potential liability in the incident. This development added another complex dimension to an already multifaceted case. The trial of Mandy Carell began 6 months after the shooting. The prosecution painted Mandy as a cold-blooded killer, arguing that her actions were premeditated and born of jealousy. They presented evidence of her declining mental state and the calculated retrieval of the weapon as proof of intent. The defense, however, portrayed Mandy as a victim of circumstance, a woman pushed to the brink by betrayal and emotional turmoil. They brought in expert witnesses to testify about the effects of prolonged stress and emotional trauma on decision-making. Alton Rhodes's testimony was a pivotal moment in the trial. His account of the affairs and the events leading up to the shooting provided crucial context, though his appearance on the stand was clearly painful for all involved. After weeks of testimony and deliberation, the jury reached a verdict. Mandy Carell was found guilty of second-degree murder, a lesser charge than the prosecution had sought. The judge, taking into account the circumstances and Mandy's lack of prior criminal history, sentenced her to 18 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 12 years. In the years following the trial, the residents of Redwood struggled to move forward. The neighborhood, once known for its tranquility, now carried the weight of tragedy. The Hargroves and the Velasquez families, to all outward appearances, were living the American dream. Their manicured lawns and hybrid cars in the driveways gave no hint of the tempest brewing behind closed doors. Liam and Rachel Hargrove had been college sweethearts, married for 15 years. Liam, a software engineer for a local tech startup, was known for his dry wit and passion for homebrewing. Rachel, a pediatric nurse, volunteered at the neighborhood watch and was always ready with a plate of her famous lavender shortbread for new neighbors. They were the couple others looked to as a model of stability and success. Just 2 doors down lived Rafael and Marisol Velasquez. Rafael, a charismatic restaurateur, had moved from Mexico City a decade ago to open what would become the hottest fusion taqueria. His wife Marisol, a yoga instructor and part-time translator, was beloved for her vibrant energy and warm hugs. Their whirlwind romance had culminated in a beachside wedding in Tulum just 5 years prior. The two couples had become fast friends shortly after the Velasquez moved in, bonding over weekend barbecues and a shared love for wineries. They vacationed together and celebrated holidays as a unit. To their friends and neighbors, they were the picture of modern multicultural friendship. But beneath the surface of potlucks and game nights, a current of restlessness was growing, a longing for excitement, for newness, for the spark that had faded in the routines of married life. It was this unspoken desire that would lead them down a path from which there was no return. The idea first surfaced on a crisp autumn evening, as the four friends lounged in the Hargroves' hot tub, steam rising into the star-studded sky. The wine had been flowing freely, loosening tongues and lowering inhibitions. Rafael, always the jokester, had made a quip about wife-swapping that hung in the air a beat too long before nervous laughter dispersed it. But the seed had been planted. Over the next few weeks, the joke resurfaced, each time met with less laughter and more contemplative silence. It was Rachel who finally broached the subject seriously. During one of the couple's regular dinner dates, "We're all adults here," she began, her voice steady despite the trembling of her hands beneath the table. "Maybe there's something to this idea, a way to spice things up." The silence that followed was deafening. Marisol's eyes widened, darting between her husband and friends. Liam stared intently at his plate. It was Rafael who broke the tension, his usual grin replaced by a look of thoughtful consideration. The conversation that followed lasted deep into the night. Boundaries were discussed, scenarios explored, concerns voiced. Liam, initially the most hesitant, found himself warming to the idea as the others talked through the logistics. Marisol, surprisingly, was the most enthusiastic once the initial shock wore off. "It's just physical, right?" she said, her dark eyes sparkling with a mix of excitement and apprehension. "No feelings involved, a temporary arrangement to explore and then return to our partners." They agreed to think it over individually, and as couples before making any decisions. The next week was filled with hushed conversations behind closed doors, furtive glances across the street, and more than one sleepless night spent staring at the ceiling, imagining possibilities. When they reconvened, the decision was unanimous if tentative. They would try it, just once, to see how it felt. Rules were established: a 1-month time frame, complete honesty with their original partners, and the freedom to call it off at any time if anyone felt uncomfortable. As they raised their glasses to seal the agreement, none of them could have foreseen the tragedy that would unfold from this moment of adventurous curiosity. The die was cast, and the wheel of fate had begun to turn. The agreed-upon evening arrived with a palpable tension in the air. The Hargroves' home, usually a warm and inviting space, felt charged with an electric anticipation. Liam had spent the afternoon obsessively cleaning, a nervous habit that manifested whenever he felt out of his depth. Rachel, meanwhile, had changed outfits no less than 5 times before settling on a simple black dress that hugged her curves. Across the street, Rafael and Marisol prepared with a mix of excitement and trepidation. Rafael, ever the showman, had set out candles and opened a bottle of expensive tequila he'd been saving for a special occasion. Marisol moved through her son's salutations, trying to center herself and calm the butterflies in her stomach. At precisely 8 p.m., as agreed, Rachel made the short walk to the Velasquez home. Her heart pounded with each step, a mixture of guilt and exhilaration coursing through her veins. Rafael greeted her at the door with a warm smile and a glass of tequila, which she accepted gratefully. Meanwhile, Marisol arrived at the Hargroves, a vision in a flowing red dress that seemed to accentuate her every movement. Liam, usually so composed, found himself fumbling with the wine opener, suddenly acutely aware of Marisol's presence in a way he'd never been before. The initial moments were awkward, filled with stilted small talk and nervous laughter. But as the alcohol flowed and the reality of their situation set in, the atmosphere began to shift. Rafael, ever the charmer, regaled Rachel with stories of his childhood, each tale bringing him physically closer to her on the couch. Rachel found herself captivated, not just by the stories, but by the passion with which he told them, so different from Liam's reserved nature. Across the street, Liam and Marisol had moved from the living room to the kitchen, where Marisol insisted on teaching Liam how to properly make guacamole. The simple act of chopping avocados became an intimate dance, their hands brushing against each other. As the night progressed, inhibitions lowered and desires rose to the surface. Raphael's hand found its way to Rachel's thigh, and she surprised herself by not pulling away. In the Hargrove kitchen, Liam found himself mesmerized by the graceful curves of Marisol. The transition from social interaction to physical intimacy was both abrupt and natural. A lingering look, a tentative touch, and suddenly they were crossing a line that could never be uncrossed. Clothes were shed, breaths quickened, and in the dim light of bedrooms usually shared with other partners, new connections were forged. In the aftermath, as they lay in unfamiliar beds beside familiar friends, each participant grappled with a complex mix of emotions. Guilt, excitement, confusion, and a strange sense of loss all mingled together. As they drifted off to sleep, none of them realized that this night had set in motion a chain of events that would end in tragedy. For in the dim light of the Hargrove bedroom, Liam had looked into Marisol's eyes and felt something stir within him that went far beyond the physical boundaries they had agreed upon. In the days following the swap, life in the Laurelhurst neighborhood seemed to return to its usual rhythm. Liam went back to his coding, Rachel to her patients, Raphael to his restaurant, and Marisol to her yoga studio. But beneath the veneer of normalcy, a subtle shift had occurred, particularly within Liam Hargrove. At first, the changes were almost imperceptible. Liam found himself lingering a little longer at the window, his gaze drifting towards the Velasquez home. He began taking more frequent walks, timing them to coincide with Marisol's return from her yoga classes. His usual playlist of tech podcasts was replaced by the Latin music Raphael had introduced him to, the rhythms reminding him of Marisol. As weeks passed, these small changes became more pronounced. Liam's colleagues at the startup noticed his distraction, his usual laser focus on code, replaced by long periods of staring blankly at his screen. He began learning Spanish using a language app, telling Rachel it was for an upcoming project at work. Late at night, when sleep eluded him, he found himself scrolling through old photos on his phone, lingering on group pictures where Marisol's smile seemed to outshine everything else. Liam tried to rationalize these feelings, to suppress the growing emotional attachment he felt towards Marisol. He reminded himself of the agreement, of the boundaries they had set. This was supposed to be a one-time thing, a purely physical exploration. But in quiet moments, he couldn't deny the warmth that spread through his chest when he thought of her laugh, the way her eyes crinkled at the corners when she smiled. The internal struggle began to manifest externally. Liam became irritable, snapping at Rachel over small issues. He threw himself into work, staying late at the office to avoid the temptation of seeking out Marisol's company. When the two couples did get together, Liam's behavior oscillated between overly attentive to Marisol and completely avoiding her, drawing curious glances from both Rachel and Raphael. One evening, as Liam lay awake beside a sleeping Rachel, the full weight of his emotions crashed over him. He realized, with a mix of exhilaration and horror, that he was falling in love with Marisol. The thought both thrilled and terrified him. He knew he should end it, should confess to Rachel and distance himself from Marisol, but the mere idea of never being close to her again felt like a physical pain in his chest. As dawn broke, Liam made a decision. He would try harder to suppress these feelings, to be the husband Rachel deserved. But even as he resolved this, a small part of him whispered that it was already too late. The seed of desire had been planted, and it was growing into something that couldn't be easily uprooted. As autumn gave way to winter, the once warm and easy friendship between the two couples began to cool. The change was subtle at first, manifesting in canceled plans and shorter, less frequent interactions. But as weeks passed, the tension became palpable, a silent presence at every gathering. Rachel was the first to notice the shift in her husband's behavior. Liam, once an open book to her, had become distant and guarded. She caught him checking his phone more frequently, his face lighting up at certain notifications before quickly schooling his features back to neutrality. When she asked about his day, his answers became vague and evasive. During one of their now rare dinners with the Velasquez, Rachel couldn't help but notice the way Liam's eyes followed Marisol's every movement. Raphael, usually jovial and laid back, began to exhibit signs of stress. His legendary patience in the kitchen shortened, and staff at his restaurant whispered about his uncharacteristic outbursts. At home, he became possessive of Marisol in a way he'd never been before, questioning her about her daily activities and suggesting they spend less time with the Hargroves. Marisol, caught in the middle, found herself torn between her growing affection for Liam and her commitment to Raphael. She tried to maintain normalcy, suggesting double dates and neighborhood gatherings like before, but each interaction was fraught with unspoken tensions and loaded glances. The breaking point came at a neighborhood block party in early December. As holiday lights twinkled on every house, the four found themselves together for the first time in weeks. The conversation was stilted, punctuated by long silences and forced laughter. When Marisol excused herself to get a drink, Liam immediately offered to help, leaving Rachel and Raphael alone. Rachel, her suspicions finally boiling over, confronted Raphael. "Is there something going on between them?" she demanded, her voice low but intense. Raphael, his own jealousy and fears rising to the surface, lashed out defensively. "Maybe you should ask your husband that," he snapped back. Their heated exchange drew the attention of other partygoers, and by the time Liam and Marisol returned, they found their spouses in a tense standoff. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of awkward apologies and hasty goodbyes. That night in both households, long-avoided conversations finally took place. Accusations were made, denials issued, and tears shed. Rachel demanded answers from Liam, her voice cracking as she asked if he was in love with Marisol. Liam's hesitation before his denial was all the confirmation she needed. Across the street, Raphael's jealousy exploded into a rage that left Marisol shaken. His accusations of betrayal and demands for the truth echoed through their home, a jarring contrast to the peaceful life they'd built. As the night wore on, all four individuals grappled with the realization that their simple agreement had spiraled into something far more complicated and potentially destructive. The foundation of trust that had supported their friendships and marriages was crumbling, and in its place, a volatile mix of love, jealousy, and resentment was taking root. January 15th dawned cold and gray, a thick fog hanging over the town like a portent of the tragedy to come. The weeks following the block party confrontation had been tense, with both couples retreating into themselves, communication reduced to terse texts and avoided glances across the street. That evening, Liam sat in his home office, ostensibly working late but in reality lost in thoughts of Marisol. The sound of the front door opening and closing jolted him from his reverie. Rachel's voice, tight with barely controlled emotion, called out his name. In the living room, Liam found not just Rachel but Raphael and Marisol as well. The atmosphere was charged, Raphael's face a mask of barely contained fury, Marisol's eyes red-rimmed and pleading. Rachel stood apart, her posture rigid, arms crossed defensively across her chest. "We need to talk," Rachel began, her voice trembling slightly. "All of us. This has gone on long enough." What followed was a maelstrom of emotions, years of friendship, and months of hidden feelings exploding into the open. Raphael accused Liam of pursuing Marisol, of trying to steal her away. Rachel, tears streaming down her face, demanded to know how long the affair had been going on. Marisol, caught between her growing feelings for Liam and her loyalty to Raphael, tried desperately to calm the situation. Liam, overwhelmed by the onslaught, initially retreated into denial. But as the accusations flew and emotions heightened, something inside him snapped. In a moment of reckless honesty, he confessed his feelings for Marisol, his words cutting through the chaos like a knife. Raphael, his face contorting with rage, lunged at Liam. The two men grappled, years of friendship evaporating in an instant as fists flew and furniture toppled. Rachel screamed for them to stop, her pleas drowned out by the sounds of the struggle. Marisol tried to intervene, attempting to pull Raphael away, but was shoved aside in the chaos. In the frenzy, no one noticed Raphael's hand closing around a heavy crystal vase. It wasn't until the sickening thud of crystal meeting flesh and bone echoed through the room that everything froze. Liam crumpled to the ground, blood pooling rapidly around his head. The vase slipped from Raphael's hand, shattering on the hardwood floor. For a moment, no one moved, the scene before them too horrific to comprehend. It was Rachel who broke the paralysis, her nurse's training kicking in as she rushed to Liam's side. Her fingers frantically sought a pulse as she barked orders at the others to call 911. Marisol, shaking uncontrollably, fumbled with her phone, her tear-blurred vision making it hard to dial. Raphael stood motionless, his face a mask of shock and disbelief at what he had done. The sound of sirens in the distance broke through the haze, snapping him back to the horrifying reality of the situation. Paramedics arrived minutes later, but their efforts were in vain. Liam Hargrove was pronounced dead at the scene, his life extinguished in a moment of uncontrolled passion. As police cars pulled up, their flashing lights illuminating the quiet street, neighbors emerged from their homes drawn by the commotion. In the chaos that followed, statements were taken, evidence collected. Raphael, still in a state of shock, offered no resistance as he was handcuffed and led to a waiting police car. As dawn broke, the idyllic facade of Laurelhurst had been shattered. Yellow crime scene tape fluttered in the morning breeze, a stark contrast to the well-manicured lawns and cheerful holiday decorations that still adorned some homes. The investigation into Liam Hargrove's death began in earnest the following morning. Detective Amelia Schaefer, a veteran of Homicide Division, took charge of the case, unaware of the shocking plot twist that was about to be revealed. Her first step was to separate the three survivors, each sequestered in a different interview room at the precinct. Rachel Hargrove, still in shock, provided a disjointed account of the evening's events. She spoke of the growing tension between the couples, the suspicions that had eaten away at her for weeks. Her description of the fatal confrontation was punctuated by bouts of sobbing and long haunted silences. Marisol Velasquez, visibly distraught, initially refused to speak without a lawyer present. When one arrived, she gave a tearful confession about the affair with Liam, insisting that it had been emotional rather than physical since the initial swap. She described Raphael's increasing jealousy and controlling behavior in the weeks leading up to the tragedy. Rafael Velasquez, advised by his lawyer to remain silent, sat stoically through initial questioning. However, as the hours wore on and the gravity of his situation became clear, he broke down. In a moment of raw honesty, he admitted to striking Liam but insisted he never meant to kill him. It was an accident, he repeated over and over, his voice hoarse with emotion. As statements were taken, forensic teams combed through both the Hargrove and Velasquez residences. They uncovered a series of text messages between Liam and Marisol, revealing the depth of their emotional entanglement. Emails drafts found on Liam's computer showed he had been contemplating leaving Rachel, adding another layer to the tragedy. The murder weapon, the crystal vase, was sent to the lab for analysis. Fingerprints matched Raphael's, and traces of Liam's blood and hair were found embedded in the shattered pieces. The force required to cause such catastrophic injury was consistent with Raphael's build and the rage described by witnesses. Neighbors were interviewed, painting a picture of two couples who had once been the cornerstone of the community. Many expressed shock, unable to reconcile the violent act with the friendly, successful people they thought they knew. As the investigation progressed, Detective Schaefer began to piece together a timeline of events. The initial wife swap, intended as a one-time exploration, had sparked an emotional affair between Liam and Marisol. This, in turn, had led to mounting tensions and suspicions, culminating in the fatal confrontation. The case, initially seeming straightforward, grew more complex as layers of motivation and circumstance were revealed. As the first week of the investigation drew to a close, Detective Schaefer stood before a board covered in photos, timelines, and connecting threads. The facts were clear, but the full truth of what had transpired in the Hargrove living room that fateful night remained elusive. The case was far from closed, and the ripples of this tragedy would continue to spread through the lives of all involved. As the investigation deepened, Detective Schaefer and her team began to uncover layers of complexity that went beyond the surface narrative. Delving into the backgrounds of all four individuals involved revealed hidden motivations and long-buried secrets that cast the events in a new light. Liam Hargrove, it emerged, had a history of depression that he had carefully hidden from all but Rachel. Interviews with his colleagues revealed a man who had been struggling with his work in recent months, his usual passion for coding replaced by a listlessness that many had attributed to simple burnout. A deeper dive into his medical records showed a recent change in antidepressant medication, one that came with warnings about increased impulsivity and mood swings. Rachel's perfected image of the devoted wife and nurse also began to crack under scrutiny. Former co-workers spoke of her intense ambition, of opportunities for advancement she had passed up to support Liam's career. Some hinted at resentment that had been building for years, carefully hidden behind a facade of contentment. Her enthusiastic suggestion of the wife swap began to look less like a spontaneous idea and more like a calculated risk to shake up her stagnant marriage. Rafael Velasquez's charismatic exterior concealed a man haunted by insecurities. Immigration records revealed a complicated history, with Rafael having overstayed a student visa years ago before marrying Marisol and gaining legal status. This precarious past had left him with a deep-seated fear of losing everything he had built, manifesting in his recent controlling behavior towards Marisol. Perhaps most surprisingly, Marisol's image as the carefree yoga instructor belied a woman with hidden depths. A sealed juvenile record from her teenage years in California hinted at a troubled past she had worked hard to overcome. Friends from before her marriage to Rafael described a passionate, often reckless young woman who had seemingly transformed herself into the picture of stability upon moving to Portland. As these details came to light, the narrative of the case shifted. What had initially seemed a straightforward crime of passion revealed itself to be the culmination of years of unspoken tensions, secret struggles, and unfulfilled desires. The wife swap agreement, far from being the catalyst, now appeared to be merely the spark that had ignited a powder keg of suppressed emotions and hidden resentments. Detective Schaefer found herself grappling with a case that defied easy categorization. The lines between victim and perpetrator blurred, with each person involved bearing some measure of responsibility for the tragedy that had unfolded. The trial of Rafael Velasquez for the murder of Liam Hargrove began on a rainy Monday in late spring, nearly 6 months after the fatal confrontation. Rafael, looking gaunt and somber in a dark suit, was led in by his defense team. Rachel Hargrove, still wearing her grief like a shroud, entered flanked by supportive colleagues. Marisol, who would be testifying for both the prosecution and the defense, slipped in through a side entrance, her once vibrant presence dimmed by months of guilt and public scrutiny. Inside the courtroom, District Attorney laid out the prosecution's case. She painted a picture of Rafael as a man consumed by jealousy, who had lashed out in a premeditated act of violence. The crystal vase, she argued, had been grabbed with intent, the fatal blow delivered with the full force of Rafael's rage. In contrast, Rafael's defense team presented their client as a man pushed to the breaking point. They spoke of the sanctity of marriage, of the betrayal Rafael had suffered, and of the confrontation as a moment of temporary insanity rather than calculated murder. Over the next 3 weeks, a parade of witnesses took the stand. Forensic experts debated the force and angle of the fatal blow. Neighbors recounted the gradual shift in dynamics between the two couples. Colleagues and friends of both Liam and Rafael testified to their states of mind in the weeks leading up to the tragedy. As the trial neared its end, both the prosecution and defense made impassioned final arguments. The judge, taking into account Rafael's unique circumstances of the case, sentenced him to 18 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 12 years. The sentence was met with mixed reactions, some feeling it was too lenient, others believing it appropriately balanced justice with mercy. Jennifer Ashcroft, a strikingly beautiful 52-year-old woman, had built her fortune in the cutthroat world of biotech. Her company was at the forefront of brain interface technology, and Jennifer was known for her razor-sharp intellect and unyielding determination. She moved through life with the confidence of someone who always got what she wanted, whether in the boardroom or the bedroom. A 20-year-old Ryan Breslin, with his brooding good looks, seemed an unlikely match for the poised and polished Jennifer. A college dropout with a troubled past, Ryan had drifted through a series of dead-end jobs before a chance encounter with Jennifer changed the trajectory of his life. Their relationship, while unconventional, appeared to offer both parties what they desired. For Jennifer, a vibrant young companion to stave off loneliness, and for Ryan, financial security and a taste of luxury he had never known. For nearly a year, their arrangement flourished in the shadows of Riverton. But as summer gave way to autumn, a shift in their delicate dynamic would set in motion a chain of events that would end in bloodshed, leaving the community to grapple with the dark undercurrents that had been flowing beneath its pristine surface all along. Jennifer Ashcroft's path to wealth and power began in the middle-class suburbs of Boston, Born to a high school chemistry teacher and a librarian, young Jennifer showed an early aptitude for science and an insatiable curiosity about the human mind. Her parents, recognizing her potential, scrimped and saved to provide her with every educational opportunity they could afford. At 16, Jennifer's life took a dramatic turn when her science fair project on neurotransmitters caught the eye of a visiting professor from MIT. Impressed by her precocious talent, he became her mentor, guiding her through accelerated studies and into the prestigious neuroscience program at MIT. It was here that Jennifer's ambition truly took flight. During her graduate studies, Jennifer's research into neuroplasticity attracted the attention of several biotech startups. By 25, she had secured her first patent, a fledgling company working on brain-computer interfaces. Under Jennifer's leadership, the company flourished, its stock price soaring as breakthroughs in the technology made headlines. With each success, Jennifer's wealth and influence grew, but so did her reputation for ruthlessness. Former colleagues spoke in hushed tones of her ability to charm and manipulate, to identify weaknesses and exploit them mercilessly. Jennifer's personal life was marked by a series of short-lived marriages, each ending as her partners found themselves unable to compete with her true passion, her work. Her first husband, a fellow researcher she met at MIT, lasted 3 years before filing for divorce, citing emotional neglect. The second, a charming venture capitalist, made it to year 5 before Jennifer's suspicions of his infidelity led to an acrimonious split. After her third divorce at 48, from a younger art dealer who claimed she had become obsessively controlling, Jennifer swore off traditional relationships. Instead, she began to seek out the company of much younger men, drawn to their vitality and the uncomplicated nature of purely transactional arrangements. It was a lifestyle that suited her, allowing her to maintain control while satisfying her needs for companionship and physical intimacy. Yet as Jennifer approached her 50s, a creeping sense of loneliness began to gnaw at her. It was this vulnerability, carefully hidden beneath her polished exterior, that would leave her susceptible to the intoxicating allure of Ryan Breslin and the destructive jealousy that would follow. Ryan Breslin's early life stood in stark contrast to Jennifer's. Born in a small town in rural Pennsylvania, Ryan was the youngest of 4 children in a family perpetually teetering on the edge of poverty. His father, a long-haul trucker with a penchant for alcohol, was rarely home. His mother, overwhelmed and battling depression, struggled to keep the family afloat. From a young age, Ryan learned to fend for himself. Blessed with good looks and natural charm, he discovered early on that these attributes could be leveraged to his advantage. By high school, Ryan had perfected the art of getting by with minimal effort, relying on his charisma to smooth over his academic shortcomings and disciplinary issues. Despite his lackluster academic performance, Ryan's SAT scores were surprisingly high, hinting at an intelligence he rarely applied to his studies. This, combined with his prowess on the basketball court, earned him a scholarship to a small liberal arts college in Philadelphia. However, the freedom of college life proved too tempting for Ryan. Away from the watchful eyes of his family and high school teachers, he fell in with a party crowd. His grades plummeted, and by the end of his freshman year, Ryan had lost his scholarship. Too ashamed to return home, he decided to stay in Philadelphia, bouncing between low-wage jobs and crashing on friends' couches. It was during this aimless period that Ryan's path intersected with Jennifer's. Working as a barista in an upscale cafe frequented by business executives, Ryan caught Jennifer's eye one rainy Tuesday morning. She was struck by his easy smile and the hint of vulnerability behind his confident demeanor. For Ryan, Jennifer represented everything he thought he wanted: sophistication, success, and the promise of a life far removed from his humble beginnings. Their initial flirtation quickly evolved into something more. Jennifer, intrigued by Ryan's raw potential and eager to shape him into her ideal companion, offered him a proposition. She would provide him with financial support, introduce him to her world of luxury and refinement in exchange for his exclusive companionship. For Ryan, faced with mounting debts and dwindling prospects, the offer seemed too good to refuse. Seizing the opportunity, Jennifer invited him as her guest, her tone making it clear that this was more than a casual invitation. The gallery opening marked the beginning of Ryan's induction into Jennifer's world. She arrived at his shabby apartment, presenting him with a tailored suit that fit him perfectly. As they moved through the event, Jennifer expertly guided Ryan, whispering explanations about the art and introducing him to her circles as her young protege. For Ryan, the evening was intoxicating. He found himself easily slipping into the role of the charming, artistic young man, feeding off the approving glances and engaging conversations with Jennifer's peers. As the night wore on, the attraction between them grew palpable, culminating in a passionate encounter back at Jennifer's penthouse. In the afterglow, Jennifer laid out her proposition. She would provide Ryan with a generous monthly allowance, pay for his education if he chose to return to college, and introduce him to opportunities he could only dream of. In return, she expected his companionship, discretion, and exclusivity. Ryan, seeing a chance to reinvent himself and escape his directionless existence, agreed without hesitation. The following months were a whirlwind for Ryan. Jennifer moved him into the guest house on her estate, replacing his wardrobe with designer labels and introducing him to the finer things in life. She enrolled him in art appreciation classes, hired a personal trainer to hone his already impressive physique, and taught him the nuances of wine tasting and fine dining. Jennifer took immense pleasure in molding Ryan, viewing him as both a project and a prized possession. She reveled in the envious glances they received when they attended events together, proudly showing off her attractive young companion. For Ryan, the relationship offered security and excitement in equal measure. He threw himself into his new role with enthusiasm, eager to prove his worth and maintain the lifestyle to which he was quickly becoming accustomed. Their physical relationship was passionate and adventurous, with Jennifer introducing Ryan to experiences he had never imagined. She pushed his boundaries, always maintaining control, a dynamic that spilled over into other aspects of their relationship. As summer turned to fall, Jennifer and Ryan settled into a rhythm of lavish vacations, social events, and intimate evenings at home. To the outside world, they appeared to be an unconventional but happy couple. However, beneath the surface, the seeds of codependency and obsession were taking root, setting the stage for the turmoil that was to come. The delicate balance of Jennifer and Ryan's relationship began to shift with the arrival of Aria Thornton, a 20-year-old art history major at the local university. Aria entered their lives innocuously enough, as a part-time docent at the Museum of Modern Art. Ryan first encountered Aria during one of his frequent visits to the museum, a habit encouraged by Jennifer to further his art education. Aria was leading a tour group, her passion for the artwork evident in her animated descriptions and insightful commentary. Ryan found himself drawn to her enthusiasm, so different from Jennifer's calculated appreciation of art as a status symbol. After the tour, Ryan approached Aria, engaging her in a discussion about the exhibition. Their conversation flowed easily, punctuated by shared laughter and a palpable sense of connection. For the first time in months, Ryan felt truly seen for who he was, rather than as an extension of Jennifer. Aria, with her vibrant style and infectious laugh, represented everything that Jennifer was not. Where Jennifer was polished and restrained, Aria was spontaneous and expressive. Her youth and energy resonated with Ryan, reminding him of the pure relationships he had sacrificed for his arrangement with Jennifer. Over the next few weeks, Ryan found himself visiting the museum more frequently, always managing to time his visits with Aria's shifts. Their friendship blossomed quickly, bonding over shared interests in art, music, and philosophy. Aria introduced Ryan to her world of college parties, indie film screenings, and late-night discussions in 24-hour diners. For Ryan, these interactions with Aria and her friends were a breath of fresh air. He rediscovered parts of himself that had been suppressed in his relationship with Jennifer, including his own artistic aspirations. Aria encouraged him to pursue his interest in photography, even gifting him a vintage camera she had found at a flea market. As Ryan spent more time with Aria, he began to question the nature of his relationship with Jennifer. The stark contrast between the genuine connection he felt with Aria and the transactional nature of his arrangement with Jennifer became increasingly apparent. He found himself manufacturing excuses to spend time away from the estate, his thoughts constantly drifting to Aria. Unbeknownst to Ryan, his changing behavior and growing distraction had not gone unnoticed by Jennifer. Her keen instincts, honed by years of corporate maneuvering, sensed a shift in their dynamic. As Ryan pulled away, Jennifer's determination to maintain control over him only intensified, setting the stage for the conflict that would ultimately lead to tragedy. The first signs of trouble were subtle. Jennifer noticed Ryan checking his phone more frequently, his face lighting up at certain messages. He began to spend more time at the museum, citing a newfound passion for contemporary art. While Jennifer initially encouraged this interest, a nagging suspicion began to take root in her mind. One evening, as they prepared for a charity gala, Jennifer casually asked about Ryan's day at the museum. His response was enthusiastic, filled with details about a new exhibition. But it was the mention of Aria, the incredibly knowledgeable docent, that caught Jennifer's attention. The way Ryan's eyes sparkled as he spoke of her set off alarm bells in Jennifer's head. Determined to uncover the truth, Jennifer began to monitor Ryan more closely. She installed a GPS tracker on his phone under the guise of a security upgrade. She hired a private investigator to follow him during his outings. The reports she received confirmed her worst fears. Ryan was spending considerable time with a young woman, their body language indicating a clear attraction. As evidence of Ryan's growing connection with Aria mounted, Jennifer's jealousy festered. She oscillated between icy detachment and clingy desperation, her moods becoming increasingly unpredictable. One moment she would shower Ryan with expensive gifts. The next, she would subject him to passive-aggressive comments and veiled threats. Jennifer's behavior began to affect her professional life as well. She became distracted during important meetings, snapping at employees for minor infractions. Her assistant noticed an increase in her alcohol consumption, often finding empty wine bottles in her office trash. Unable to contain her suspicions any longer, Jennifer confronted Ryan after a particularly late night out. She demanded to know where he had been, accusing him of betraying her trust. Ryan, caught off guard, attempted to downplay his friendship with Aria, insisting that Jennifer was overreacting. The argument escalated quickly, with Jennifer reminding Ryan of everything she had done for him and insinuating that he owed her his loyalty. This confrontation marked a turning point in their relationship. Ryan, feeling trapped and resentful of Jennifer's possessiveness, began to withdraw further. He became more guarded with his phone, careful not to mention Aria, and invented elaborate excuses for his absences. Jennifer, driven by her growing paranoia, intensified her efforts to control Ryan. She insisted on accompanying him to art events, her possessive body language sending a clear message to anyone who approached them. She surprised him with impromptu visits to the museum, her sharp eyes scanning for any sign of the young docent who had captured Ryan's attention. As the weeks wore on, the emotional chasm between Jennifer and Ryan widened. Their once passionate encounters became mechanical, tinged with an undercurrent of resentment. Jennifer's jealousy morphed into an obsession, consuming her thoughts and driving her to increasingly desperate measures to keep Ryan by her side. Little did she know that her possessive love was pushing Ryan further away, steering them both towards a confrontation that would have fatal consequences. As Jennifer's jealousy intensified, she embarked on a calculated campaign to maintain control over Ryan. Drawing on the same strategic thinking that had made her a formidable businesswoman, she deployed a range of manipulation tactics designed to keep Ryan dependent on her and isolated from Aria's influence. Jennifer's first move was to exploit Ryan's financial dependence. She began to withhold his allowance, citing fictitious issues with her accounts or claiming she needed to reallocate funds for business purposes. When Ryan expressed concern, she would relent, but not before extracting promises of increased commitment and time spent together. Emotional manipulation became Jennifer's primary weapon. She oscillated between lavishing Ryan with affection and subjecting him to prolonged periods of icy silence. This hot and cold treatment left Ryan constantly off balance, never sure where he stood. Jennifer also employed more subtle tactics to isolate Ryan from potential support systems. She scheduled trips that conveniently coincided with plans Ryan had made with friends. She expressed concern about his old acquaintances, implying they were a bad influence or simply using him for his newfound status. Gradually, Ryan's social circle shrank, leaving Jennifer as his primary source of companionship and validation. In moments of perceived threat, Jennifer would remind Ryan of all she had done for him, framing her controlling behavior as acts of love and generosity. She'd recount how she had rescued him from a life of poverty and obscurity, implying that without her, he would be nothing. These guilt trips served to reinforce Ryan's sense of obligation and indebtedness to Jennifer. As Ryan continued to pull out, Jennifer's tactics grew more desperate. She began to fake health scares, claiming stress-induced migraines or fainting spells that mysteriously coincided with times Ryan wanted to go out alone. Her performance was so convincing that Ryan often canceled his plans out of genuine concern for her well-being. Through this web of manipulation, Jennifer sought to create a reality where Ryan believed he needed her, where his autonomy was slowly eroded until staying with her seemed like the only viable option. Yet, with each manipulative act, she was pushing Ryan closer to his breaking point, fueling a resentment that would soon boil over with devastating consequences. During one of her clandestine investigations into Ryan's past, Jennifer uncovered a secret that she believed would give her the ultimate leverage. Through her network of private investigators, she learned that Ryan had been involved in a car accident during his freshman year of college. The accident had resulted in a serious injury to another student, but Ryan had fled the scene in a panic. The case had gone cold due to lack of evidence, but Jennifer now held the missing pieces. Armed with this explosive information, Jennifer carefully planned her approach. She waited for a moment when Ryan was particularly vulnerable, after a heated argument about his increasing absences. As Ryan turned to leave, Jennifer calmly mentioned the accident. The color drained from Ryan's face as he slowly turned back to her. Jennifer laid out the facts with cold precision. Producing police reports, she made it clear that she possessed enough evidence to reopen the case and implicate Ryan. The unspoken threat hung heavy in the air. If Ryan didn't comply with her wishes, she would turn the information over to the authorities. The revelation shattered Ryan. The accident had been the catalyst for his downward spiral in college. The guilt eating away at him for years. He had convinced himself that by leaving his old life behind, he could escape his past. Now that illusion was cruelly stripped away. Jennifer pressed her advantage, presenting Ryan with a choice. He could recommit to their relationship, cut all ties with Arya, and follow Jennifer's rules to the letter. Or she would expose his secret, ruining his life and possibly sending him to prison. Trapped and desperate, Ryan initially agreed to Jennifer's demands. He stopped visiting the museum, ignored Arya's increasingly worried messages, and became a virtual prisoner in Jennifer's gilded cage. Jennifer reveled in her victory, believing she had finally secured Ryan's unwavering loyalty. However, the weight of the blackmail soon began to take its toll on both of them. Ryan became withdrawn and depressed, his once vibrant personality dulled by the constant stress of living under threat. He went through the motions of their relationship, but the spark that had initially drawn Jennifer to him was extinguished. Jennifer, for her part, found that her victory left her feeling hollow. The passionate, challenging young man she had fallen for was replaced by a submissive shell. She vacillated between guilt over her actions and frustration at Ryan's listlessness. As weeks passed, the tension in the household became unbearable. Ryan's resentment simmered just below the surface, while Jennifer's paranoia grew. She became convinced that Ryan was plotting against her, looking for a way to neutralize her leverage. The situation was untenable, a powder keg waiting for a spark. That spark would come in the form of a chance encounter that would push Ryan to his limits and set in motion the final fatal confrontation between him and Jennifer. The catalyst for the final confrontation came on a crisp autumn evening. Jennifer had dragged Ryan to a gallery opening, parading him before her peers like a prized possession. As they moved through the crowd, Ryan's eyes locked with a familiar face across the room. It was Arya, looking striking in a vintage dress, her presence a stark reminder of the freedom and genuine connection he had lost. Before Jennifer could react, Ryan mumbled an excuse and fled the gallery. He found himself wandering the streets, his mind racing. The chance encounter with Arya had awakened something in him, a fierce desire for freedom, a reminder of the person he once was and could be again. When Ryan finally returned to the estate in the early hours of the morning, he found Jennifer waiting for him, her face a mask of cold fury. The argument that ensued was unlike any they had before. Ryan, emboldened by his realization and no longer willing to be controlled, confronted Jennifer about her manipulation and blackmail. Jennifer, sensing she was losing her grip on Ryan, resorted to her final play. She reminded him of the evidence she held, threatening not only to expose his past, but to use her influence to destroy any future he might hope to have. She painted a vivid picture of the ruin that awaited him if he dared to leave her. But instead of cowing Ryan, her threats only served to strengthen his resolve. In a moment of clarity, he realized that no future with Jennifer, no matter how luxurious, was worth the price of his soul. With a calmness that belied the turmoil within him, Ryan told Jennifer that he was leaving, regardless of the consequences. Jennifer, faced with the reality of losing Ryan despite her best efforts, snapped. What happened next would shock the community and change both their lives forever. As Ryan turned to leave, Jennifer's composure shattered completely. With a primal scream of rage and desperation, she lunged at him, her manicured nails raking across his face. Ryan, caught off guard by the sudden violence, stumbled backward, knocking over an antique vase that shattered on the marble floor. The sound of breaking porcelain seemed to push Jennifer further into a frenzy. She grabbed a heavy crystal decanter from the bar cart and swung it at Ryan's head. He ducked, the decanter missing him by inches and smashing against the wall, showering them both with glass and expensive scotch. Ryan, realizing the gravity of the situation, tried to restrain Jennifer, pleading with her to calm down. But Jennifer was beyond reason. She clawed at him, kicking and screaming incoherently about betrayal and ingratitude. In the struggle, they careened into Jennifer's prized art collection, paintings crashing to the floor around them. As they grappled, Jennifer's hand closed around a letter opener on her desk, a wicked, ornate thing that was more weapon than office tool. She plunged it toward Ryan's chest. He managed to deflect the blow, but the blade sliced deeply into his arm, drawing a spray of blood. The sight of blood seemed to momentarily snap Jennifer back to reality. She staggered back, the letter opener falling from her suddenly nerveless fingers. Ryan, clutching his bleeding arm, saw an opportunity to escape and made a dash for the door. But Jennifer, in a final desperate act, grabbed his injured arm, yanking him back with surprising strength. Ryan, acting on pure instinct and adrenaline, shoved her away hard. Jennifer stumbled backward, her heel catching on the rug. Time seemed to slow as she fell, her head striking the corner of the heavy marble fireplace with a sickening crack. Jennifer crumpled to the floor, a pool of blood quickly spreading beneath her hair. Ryan stood frozen, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. The room, so recently a scene of chaos, was suddenly terribly still. With trembling hands, Ryan checked for a pulse, finding none. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Jennifer was dead, and his life as he knew it was over. In a daze, he stumbled out of the house into the cool night air, leaving behind a scene of destruction that would soon become the center of a sensational investigation. The grisly discovery was made by Jennifer's housekeeper, Elodia Ramirez, early the next morning. Her screams upon finding her employer's lifeless body shattered the tranquil morning silence of Riverton, bringing neighbors running and prompting a flurry of calls to 911. Detective Lydia Blackwell, a veteran of the Riverton Police Department's Homicide Division, arrived at the scene within the hour. The opulent living room, now a tableau of violence, told a story of a fierce struggle. Broken glass crunched under her feet as she made her initial survey, noting the overturned furniture, shattered artifacts, and the smears of blood that led to Jennifer's body by the fireplace. As crime scene technicians swarmed the house, Detective Blackwell began piecing together the events of a previous night. Security camera footage showed Ryan fleeing the premises in the early hours of the morning, his shirt stained with blood. His swift disappearance made him the prime suspect, and an all-points bulletin was issued for his arrest. As the investigation progressed, a more complex picture began to emerge. Interviews with staff and acquaintances revealed the tumultuous nature of Jennifer and Ryan's relationship. Several witnesses reported hearing frequent arguments and expressed concern about Jennifer's increasingly erratic behavior. A breakthrough came when detectives discovered Jennifer's hidden files detailing her investigation into Ryan's past. The evidence of blackmail added a new dimension to the case, suggesting that Ryan might have been acting in desperation rather than cold-blooded murder. Meanwhile, Ryan remained at large. Sightings were reported across the state, but he managed to elude capture. The turning point in the investigation came from an unexpected source. Aria Thornton, racked with guilt over her role in the events, came forward with crucial information. She provided investigators with text messages and voicemails from Ryan, documenting Jennifer's escalating behavior and his growing fear. Aria's testimony painted a picture of Ryan as a victim of manipulation and abuse, trapped in a gilded cage by Jennifer's wealth and threats. This new perspective prompted Detective Blackwell to dig deeper into Jennifer's past, uncovering a pattern of obsessive behavior and allegations of stalking from her previous relationships. Forensic evidence from the crime scene began to corroborate Ryan's version of events. The angle of Jennifer's fatal injury was consistent with an accidental fall, and defensive wounds on her hands suggested she had been the aggressor in the final confrontation. Perhaps the most damning evidence came from Jennifer's own digital footprint. A thorough examination of her computers revealed the full extent of her surveillance of Ryan, including GPS tracking data and recordings from hidden cameras in their home. The level of invasion and control shocked even the most seasoned investigators. As the true nature of Jennifer and Ryan's relationship came to light, public opinion began to shift. The narrative of the gold-digging boy toy gave way to a more nuanced understanding of a young man trapped in an abusive situation. Initially charged with second-degree murder, Ryan's case took an unexpected turn. As evidence of Jennifer's manipulation and abuse mounted, the district attorney's office faced increasing pressure to reconsider the charges. After lengthy deliberations and negotiations with Ryan's defense team, the charges were reduced to manslaughter. After weeks of testimony and 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned their verdict. Ryan was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter, a verdict that acknowledged his role in Jennifer's death, while also recognizing the extenuating circumstances that led to the fatal confrontation. The judge, taking into account Ryan's lack of prior criminal record and the unusual circumstances of the case, sentenced him to 5 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 3 years. The sentence was met with mixed reactions, some feeling it was too lenient, others arguing that Ryan had already suffered enough. Randall Mamet, a successful businessman, his wife Sydney, a dedicated homemaker, and Sydney's daughter from a previous marriage, Celeste, lived in a sprawling house. Their neighbors saw them as the perfect family, affluent, attractive, and seemingly happy. But beneath the polished exterior of manicured lawns and dinner parties, a sinister undercurrent was about to pull the Mamets into a vortex of forbidden desire, betrayal, and ultimately, violence. What began as a typical case of marital discontent would spiral into a shocking tale of taboo romance between stepfather and stepdaughter, culminating in a confrontation that ended in twisted death and others' lives shattered beyond repair. Randall and Sydney Mamet's romance began like many others, with a chance encounter at a charity gala in Philadelphia in the spring of 2010. Randall, then 35, was a rising star in the world of finance, known for his sharp mind and charismatic personality. Sydney, 32 at the time, was a divorcee with a young daughter, working as an interior designer for wealthy clients. Their whirlwind courtship captivated their social circle. Randall was smitten by Sydney's elegance and wit, while Sydney saw in Randall the stability and success she craved after her tumultuous first marriage. Within 6 months, Randall had proposed, presenting Sydney with a dazzling diamond ring that became the envy of their friends. The wedding, held at the prestigious Rittenhouse Hotel, was the social event of the season. Sydney's 7-year-old daughter, Celeste, served as the flower girl, her cherubic face beaming as she watched her mother marry the man who would become her stepfather. For the first few years, the Mamet seemed to thrive. Randall's career continued to soar, and he was soon made partner at his firm. Sydney threw herself into the role of the perfect corporate wife, hosting dinner parties and charity events that cemented their status in elite circles. She doted on Celeste, ensuring the girl wanted for nothing, from the best schools to extravagant vacations. But as the novelty of their new life together wore off, cracks began to appear in the foundation of their marriage. Randall's long hours at the office and frequent business trips left Sydney feeling neglected. She had given up her career to support his, and now found herself increasingly isolated in their large, empty house. Sydney's attempts to rekindle the romance were met with indifference from Randall, who seemed more interested in his spreadsheets than his wife. Their conversations, once filled with laughter and shared dreams, became terse exchanges about household matters and Celeste's school schedule. By the time Celeste entered high school, the Mamet's marriage existed mostly for show. They slept in separate bedrooms, citing Randall's snoring as the reason to curious friends. Their interactions were cordial but cold, like business partners rather than loving spouses. Sydney threw herself into volunteer work and her role as Celeste's mother, living vicariously through her daughter's achievements and social life. Randall buried himself deeper in his work, taking on more responsibilities at the firm and spending even less time at home. Neither was willing to admit defeat and file for divorce. Their shared fear of scandal, the comfort of their lifestyle, and concern for how it would affect Celeste kept them trapped in their loveless union. Little did they know that their carefully maintained facade was about to crumble in the most unexpected and tragic way. As Celeste blossomed from a precocious child into a striking young woman, the dynamics in the Mamet household began to shift. Now 18 and preparing for college, Celeste had inherited her mother's grace and her biological father's vivacious spirit. Celeste's relationship with her mother had always been close, if sometimes strained by Sydney's tendency to overprotect and live through her daughter's experiences. With Randall, however, things had been more complicated. In the early years of the marriage, he had been a doting stepfather, attending her recitals and helping with homework. But as his marriage to Sydney cooled, so did his interactions with Celeste. That changed during Celeste's senior year of high school. Randall, perhaps feeling the weight of his own mortality as he approached 50, began to take a renewed interest in his stepdaughter's life. He attended her dance performances, beaming with pride from the audience. He engaged her in conversations about her college plans, offering advice on majors and career paths. Sydney, at first, was pleased to see Randall finally acting like part of the family again. She encouraged the father-daughter bonding, hoping it might somehow bridge the gulf in their marriage. But as the months wore on, she began to sense something unsettling in the way Randall looked at Celeste, in the way their conversations would stop abruptly when she entered a room. Celeste, for her part, found herself drawn to Randall in a way that both excited and confused her. His attention made her feel seen in a way she hadn't before. She began to dress more carefully when she knew he'd be home, to seek out his company under the guise of needing help with college applications or financial advice. The tension in the house grew palpable. Family dinners became a minefield of loaded glances and double entendres. Sydney watched with growing unease as her daughter and husband orbited each other, their gravitational pull seeming to exclude her entirely. As Celeste's high school graduation approached, the Mamet house was a powder keg of unspoken desires and simmering resentments. None of them could have predicted the explosion that was to come, or the devastating aftermath that would follow. The line between appropriate stepfather-stepdaughter affection and something more sinister was crossed on a rainy night in April, just weeks before Celeste's graduation. Sydney was out of town for a charity event, leaving Randall and Celeste alone in the house. They had settled in to watch a movie, a bottle of wine between them, Randall reasoning that at 18 Celeste was old enough for a glass or two under parental supervision. As the wine flowed and the storm raged outside, their inhibitions lowered. Celeste, emboldened by alcohol and the charged atmosphere, confessed to Randall that she had always found him attractive. Randall, his judgment clouded and his loneliness overwhelming, responded not with the fatherly dismissal he should have, but with a confession of his own growing feelings. One touch led to another, and soon they found themselves entangled on the couch, years of suppressed attraction exploding into a passionate encounter. The next morning brought with it shame, confusion, and the thrill of forbidden fruit tasted. Both Randall and Celeste swore it would never happen again, that it was a mistake born of loneliness and wine. But the dam had broken, and the flood of desire was not so easily contained. Stolen glances became stolen kisses, furtive touches beneath the dinner table, coded text messages arranging clandestine meetings. They justified their actions to themselves and each other. Randall wasn't Celeste's real father, they reasoned. Sydney had been cold and distant for years. They were both consenting adults. Love, they told each other, couldn't be wrong. But the guilt gnawed at them, particularly Celeste. She saw the pain in her mother's eyes, the growing suspicion. She knew the devastating impact this would have if discovered. Yet she couldn't bring herself to end it, addicted to the rush of their forbidden romance. Randall compartmentalized, as he did with all aspects of his life. When with Sydney, he played the role of distant but dutiful husband. With his colleagues, he was the consummate professional. But in those secret moments with Celeste, he allowed himself to feel a passion he thought he had lost forever. Their trysts became more frequent and daring as the weeks passed. A rendezvous at a motel on the outskirts of town, under the guise of college tours. Heated encounters in Randall's car, parked in secluded spots. Each time they swore it would be the last. Each time they found themselves drawn back together, powerless against the pull of their illicit desire. But as spring turned to summer, the web of lies they had woven began to tangle, threatening to ensnare them all. As Celeste's freshman year of college approached, the affair between her and Randall intensified. The impending separation seemed to fuel their passion, each encounter tinged with a desperate urgency. They began taking greater risks, their need for each other overriding their caution. Randall started finding excuses to visit Celeste at her college campus, a mere 2-hour drive away. He would claim business meetings in the area, when in reality he was spending long, luxurious afternoons tangled in the sheets of Celeste's dorm room. Celeste, for her part, would invent study groups and extracurricular activities to explain her frequent trips home on weekends. Their behavior began to impact their relationships with others. Randall grew even more distant from Sydney, barely able to look at her without feeling a stab of guilt. He threw himself into his work with renewed vigor, using it as both an escape and an excuse for his absences. Celeste struggled to connect with her college peers, always holding back, always guarding her explosive secret. The affair also began to change them as individuals. Randall, reinvigorated by his relationship with Celeste, started paying more attention to his appearance. He joined a gym, updated his wardrobe, even contemplated hair restoration treatments. His colleagues remarked on his newfound energy, assuming he had finally found work-life balance. Celeste, meanwhile, found herself torn between exhilaration and shame. She excelled in her studies, channeling her turbulent emotions into her coursework, but her social life suffered. She rebuffed advances from classmates, unable to contemplate a normal relationship while entangled with her stepfather. There were close calls that should have served as wake-up calls. Once, Sydney nearly walked in on them in a compromising position in the pool house, saved only by a well-timed phone call that delayed her arrival home. Another time, one of Celeste's dorm mates spotted Randall leaving her room early in the morning, leading to awkward questions that Celeste clumsily deflected. Despite these near misses, Randall and Celeste convinced themselves they could maintain their secret indefinitely. They began making tentative plans for a future together, whispering about the day when they could finally be open about their love. Randall spoke of divorcing Sydney, of starting a new life with Celeste once she finished college. Celeste daydreamed about a fairy tale wedding, conveniently ignoring the devastation it would wreak on her mother. But as their fantasy future grew more elaborate, so did the tangled web of lies required to sustain their present. Randall's finances came under scrutiny at home as Sydney questioned the increased business expenses and mysterious cash withdrawals. Celeste's academic performance, while still strong, began to slip as the stress of her double life took its toll. The pressure began to mount, the cracks in their carefully constructed facade widening day by day. Still they persisted, each stolen moment together reinforcing their belief that their love was worth any cost. They failed to see that the price would be far higher than either of them could have imagined, and that the bill was coming due far sooner than they knew. It was during a lunch with her friend Beatrice that the first inkling of the terrible truth began to form in Sydney's mind. Beatrice, ever the gossip, mentioned offhandedly that she'd seen Randall and Celeste having an intense conversation at a cafe in town, at a time when Celeste was supposed to be at college and Randall at work. The way Beatrice described their body language, leaning in close, hands touching on the table, sent a chill down Sydney's spine. She brushed it off, laughing too loudly and changing the subject, but the seed of suspicion had been planted. From that moment on, Sydney began to pay closer attention to the interactions between her husband and daughter. She noticed the lingering glances, the inside jokes she wasn't privy to, the way they always seemed to find reasons to be alone together. As the evidence mounted, Sydney found herself trapped in a state of denial. The alternative was too horrible to contemplate, but with each passing day, the truth she didn't want to face inched closer to the surface, threatening to explode into the open and shatter their lives forever. The day Sydney's world imploded started like any other. It was a warm June morning, the air heavy with the promise of summer storms. Sydney had plans to meet friends for lunch, but a last-minute cancellation left her with an unexpected free afternoon. On a whim, she decided to surprise Randall at his office, perhaps suggest an impromptu date night to rekindle their faltering connection. But Randall wasn't in his office. His assistant, flustered by Sydney's unexpected appearance, let slip that Mr. Mamet had left early, mentioning something about a family emergency. Sydney felt her blood run cold. There was no family emergency she knew of. With trembling hands, she took out her phone and opened the tracking app she'd installed weeks ago in a moment of paranoid weakness. The pulsing dot of Randall's location appeared not at home, not at any hospital, but at a nondescript address on the outskirts of town. The drive to that address was a blur. Sydney moved on autopilot, her mind racing through possibilities, each more devastating than the last. She pulled up to a small motel, the kind that rented rooms by the hour, and there in the parking lot was Randall's car. Sydney sat in her vehicle, paralyzed with indecision. Did she really want to know? Couldn't she just drive away, pretend she'd never seen this? But then another car pulled into the lot, Celeste's beat-up college Honda. The world seemed to tilt on its axis as Sydney watched her daughter hurry across the parking lot and knock on one of the motel room doors. It opened, Randall's familiar silhouette visible for a moment before Celeste slipped inside. Sydney sat in stunned silence, her mind refusing to process what her eyes had just witnessed. Seconds stretched into minutes as she stared at the closed motel room door, willing it to be some sort of mistake, a misunderstanding, anything but the betrayal it so clearly was. Finally, operating on instinct rather than conscious thought, Sydney got out of her car. She raised her hand to knock, then paused, her fist trembling in midair. From inside she could hear muffled laughter, Celeste's musical giggle, Randall's deeper chuckle. The sounds of happiness and intimacy twisted like a knife in her gut. With a deep breath, Sydney steeled herself and rapped sharply on the door. The laughter inside abruptly ceased, replaced by hushed, panicked whispers. She knocked again, louder this time, her calm facade cracking as she called out. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity before she heard movement inside. The door opened slowly, revealing Randall, his hair mussed and shirt hastily buttoned. Behind him, Sydney could see Celeste, her face a mask of guilt and fear. In that moment, as Sydney looked from her husband to her daughter, the full weight of their betrayal came crashing down upon her. Her world, already fragile, shattered completely. The tension in the small motel room was suffocating as Sydney stepped inside, her eyes darting between Randall and Celeste. For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the hum of the ancient air conditioner and the pounding of Sydney's heart in her ears. Randall was the first to break the silence, his voice strained as he attempted to explain. But Sydney cut him off, her voice eerily calm. Randall stepped forward, attempting to shield Celeste. "Sydney, please. This isn't Celeste's fault." A harsh laugh escaped Sydney's lips. The argument escalated quickly, years of pent-up resentment and betrayal pouring out. Accusations flew back and forth. Sydney accused Randall of grooming Celeste, of taking advantage of her youth and innocence. Randall defended their relationship, insisting it was real love, that Celeste is an adult now. Celeste, caught between her mother and the man she thought she loved, tried desperately to mediate. She pleaded with Sydney to understand, swore that Randall had never taken advantage of her, that their feelings were mutual. But Sydney was beyond reason. In her eyes, this was the ultimate betrayal, not just of her as a wife, but as a mother. As the shouting reached a fever pitch, Sydney noticed Randall inching towards the bedside table. She saw the glint of metal and realized with a jolt of fear that he was reaching for something. The gun he always kept for protection. Time seemed to slow down. Sydney lunged for Randall, determined to stop him from doing something unthinkable. Celeste, seeing her mother's sudden movement, misinterpreted it as an attack on Randall and tried to intervene. In the ensuing scuffle, the gun went off. The sound of the shot was deafening in the small room. For a moment, everything went still. Then Celeste crumpled to the floor, a red stain blossoming on her shirt. Sydney's scream of anguish shattered the silence. Randall stood frozen, the gun slipping from his nerveless fingers. As Sydney frantically tried to stem the blood flowing from her daughter's wound, the full horror of what had happened began to sink in. Their secret was out, and the consequences were far more devastating than any of them could have imagined. The gunshot at the motel brought a swift response from local law enforcement. Within minutes, the small parking lot was awash in flashing lights as police cars and an ambulance converged on the scene. First responders found a tableau of tragedy in room 114. Celeste lay on the floor, barely clinging to life despite Sydney's desperate attempts to stop the bleeding. Randall Mamet sat slumped in a corner, his eyes vacant, the gun still on the floor where he had dropped it. Sydney, her hands and clothes covered in her daughter's blood, alternated between frantic pleas to the paramedics and incoherent sobs. Detective Liam Donovan, a veteran of the small police force, took charge of the scene. As Celeste was rushed to the hospital, Donovan began the grim task of piecing together what had happened in that motel room. The physical evidence was clear enough. One shot fired, one victim, the gun registered to Randall Mamet. But the why of it all was murkier. Initial questioning of Sydney and Randall yielded conflicting stories, both too distraught to provide a coherent account of events. As news of the shooting spread, the quiet community was rocked by shock and disbelief. The Mammets had always seemed like the perfect family, successful, respected, involved in local charities. The idea that such violence could erupt among them was almost inconceivable to their neighbors and friends. In the days that followed, as Celeste fought for her life in the ICU, Detective Donovan and his team worked tirelessly to unravel the truth. They combed through phone records, interviewed friends and colleagues, and dug into the family's background. Slowly, a picture began to emerge of a family not nearly as perfect as their polished exterior suggested. As Detective Donovan delved deeper into the Mammoth case, the facade of the perfect family crumbled rapidly. Interviews with family friends and colleagues painted a picture of a marriage long devoid of love, held together by appearances and financial convenience. Beatrice Whitaker, Sydney's closest friend, provided crucial information about Sydney's growing suspicions in the months leading up to the shooting. She recounted tearful lunches where Sydney had confided her fears about Randall's possible infidelity, never suspecting the true nature of his betrayal. Randall's co-workers described a man who had seemed rejuvenated in recent months, speaking often of a new love in his life. They had assumed he was having a typical midlife crisis affair, never imagining the object of his affection was his own stepdaughter. But it was Celeste's college roommate who provided the most damning evidence. Once assured of police confidentiality, Zoe shared a trove of text messages Celeste had sent her, detailing the affair with Randall in the sort of giddy, love-struck language typical of a young woman in the throes of what she believed to be true love. The digital trail proved to be a goldmine for investigators. Subpoenaed phone records showed hundreds of calls and messages between Randall and Celeste, often at odd hours. Financial records showed a pattern of expensive gifts from Randall to Celeste, jewelry, designer clothes, even a car, all carefully hidden from Sydney. There were records of hotel stays, weekend getaways disguised as business trips or college visits. As the evidence mounted, the full extent of Randall and Celeste's deception became clear. This was no sudden passion, no momentary lapse in judgment. Their affair had been going on for over a year, meticulously planned and hidden from Sydney and the world. The revelation of the affair shed new light on the events in the motel room. What had first appeared to be a case of accidental discharge during a heated argument now looked more like a potential crime of passion. As Celeste slowly recovered in the hospital, the question on everyone's mind was, who had really pulled the trigger? Was it Randall attempting to silence Celeste to save himself? Sydney in a fit of rage at their betrayal? Or Celeste herself, overcome with guilt and shame when confronted by her mother? The truth, Detective Donovan suspected, might be more complex than any of them had initially thought. District Attorney took personal charge of the case. After reviewing the evidence gathered by Detective Donovan and his team, she made the decision to charge both Randall and Sydney Mamet with attempted murder. Randall, once the picture of corporate success, appeared haggard and defeated in his orange jumpsuit. His defense team, led by high-powered attorney Xavier Brockton, argued that the shooting had been a tragic accident, the result of a struggle for the gun during a heated family argument. Sydney, by contrast, seemed to have aged years in the weeks since the incident. Her lawyer painted her as a victim, a woman betrayed by her husband and daughter, who had acted in self-defense when she believed Randall was reaching for the gun to silence them both. The question of Celeste's role in the incident loomed large over the proceedings. As the only witness to the shooting besides her parents, her testimony would be crucial. But Celeste, still recovering from her injuries, had so far invoked her Fifth Amendment rights, refusing to testify against either parent. In the end, Randall Mamet accepted the plea deal. In a hushed courtroom, he pleaded guilty to aggravated assault, receiving a sentence of 10 years in prison. As he was led away in handcuffs, he locked eyes with Sydney one last time, a look that spoke volumes about the pain, betrayal, and regret that had torn their family apart. Sydney, charges against her dropped, left the courthouse a free woman, but one irrevocably changed by the ordeal. Within months, she had sold the family home and moved out of state, seeking a fresh start away from the whispers and sidelong glances. Celeste, once she recovered from her physical wounds, faced the daunting task of healing her emotional and psychological scars. She withdrew from college, entering intensive therapy to deal with the trauma of the shooting, and the complicated emotions surrounding her relationship with Randall. Her relationship with Sydney remained strained. The breach of trust between mother and daughter, a chasm not easily bridged. The Mamet case faded from the national spotlight, but its impact lingered. It served as a cautionary tale, a reminder that even the most picture-perfect families can harbor dark secrets. The community, shaken by the violence that had erupted in their midst, began initiatives to address domestic violence and promote healthier family dynamics. At Oak Ridge Lane stood an elegant two-story home to the Corrin family. To the outside world, they appeared to be the perfect family, successful, attractive, and happy. Dwayne Corrin was known for his warm smile and impeccable taste in wine. His wife, Sandra, was a part-time yoga instructor, whose kind nature and community involvement made her a beloved figure in the neighborhood. Their children, 8-year-old Lila and 5-year-old Theo, were bright and well-mannered, often praised by teachers and other parents alike. As summer approached, the Corrin family was preparing for what they hoped would be their best year yet. Dwayne had recently secured a promotion at work. Sandra was expanding her yoga classes, and the children were excelling in school and their extracurricular activities. Little did they know that their world was about to be shattered by an unthinkable tragedy. It was a warm Tuesday afternoon in late May when Zara Jackman first stepped onto the porch of the house. At 23, Zara was a vision of youthful energy and enthusiasm. Her long auburn hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and her emerald eyes sparkled with an eagerness to please. She smoothed down her crisp white blouse and took a deep breath before ringing the doorbell. Sandra Corrin answered the door, her face lighting up with a welcoming smile. She ushered Zara inside, calling out to Dwayne and the children. As the family gathered in the living room, Zara's gaze was immediately drawn to Dwayne. His strong jawline and kind eyes made her heart skip a beat, though she quickly composed herself. Zara's background seemed impeccable. A recent graduate from the local university with a degree in child psychology, she came highly recommended by the agency. Her references spoke glowingly of her responsibility, creativity, and genuine love for children. As she interacted with Lila and Theo, it was clear that she had a natural rapport with kids. The children were instantly drawn to her warm personality and the exciting activities she proposed. Dwayne and Sandra exchanged approving glances as they watched Zara engage with their children. They were impressed by her educational background and the thoughtful questions she asked about their family routine and the children's individual needs. Zara explained her philosophy on childcare, emphasizing the importance of structure balanced with fun and learning opportunities. As the interview progressed, Zara's attention subtly shifted between the family members. While she maintained her focus on the children, her eyes would occasionally flicker to Dwayne, lingering just a moment too long. If Sandra noticed, she gave no indication, her own focus primarily on how well Zara was connecting with Lila and Theo. By the end of the meeting, the decision was unanimous. Zara would start the following week, watching the children after school and during the summer break. As she left the house, Zara felt a surge of excitement, not just for the job but for the opportunity to become part of the Corrin family's world. What the Corrin family couldn't have known was that behind Zara's polished exterior and impressive credentials lay a complex web of half-truths and carefully crafted personas. The young woman they had just welcomed into their home would become the catalyst for a series of events that would tear their perfect world apart. From the outside, the Corrin family seemed to have it all. Dwayne's career was on an upward trajectory, his recent promotion cementing his status as a rising star in the competitive world of investment banking. His colleagues admired his sharp mind and easygoing nature, while clients were drawn to his confident demeanor and track record of success. Sandra, with her lithe yoga instructor's body and serene demeanor, was the picture of health and balance. Her yoga studio had become a sanctuary for many in the community seeking peace and wellness. She juggled her growing business with volunteer work at the local women's shelter, earning her a reputation as both a skilled instructor and a compassionate member of the community. Lila, their precocious 8-year-old, was a budding artist whose paintings already adorned the walls of her elementary school. With her father's charm and her mother's grace, she was well liked by her peers and adored by her teachers. Theo, at 5, was a bundle of energy with an infectious laugh. His kindergarten teachers praised his curiosity and kindness, noting how he always included other children in his games. However, beneath the polished veneer of their lives, cracks were beginning to show. Dwayne's demanding job often kept him at the office late into the night, his absence at family dinners becoming more frequent than his presence. The stress of his high-pressure career manifested in mood swings that he struggled to control, sometimes snapping at Sandra over minor issues. Sandra, while outwardly calm, harbored a growing resentment towards Dwayne's absence and emotional distance. She threw herself into her yoga practice and volunteer work, finding fulfillment outside the home that was increasingly lacking within it. The passion that had once defined their relationship had cooled, replaced by a cordial but often tense coexistence. Despite these struggles, the Corrin family worked hard to maintain their image of perfection. They attended neighborhood barbecues with matching smiles, posted carefully curated family photos on social media, and spoke only in glowing terms about each other to friends and acquaintances. It was into this complex family dynamic that Zara Jackman stepped, her keen eyes quickly picking up on the undercurrents of tension and dissatisfaction. Where others saw a flawless facade, Zara perceived vulnerability, a family teetering on the edge of discord, ripe for manipulation. As Zara integrated herself into the Corrin household, she began to form her own narrative of the family dynamics. In her mind, Dwayne was an unappreciated husband and father, trapped in a loveless marriage with a woman who didn't understand him. The children, she believed, needed a stronger maternal figure, someone who could provide the stability and attention they craved. Little did the Corrin family know that the very person they had hired to help maintain their carefully constructed world would be the one to shatter it completely. As the weeks passed, Zara became an indispensable part of the Corrin household. Her dedication to the children was evident in the creative activities she planned, the patience she showed in helping with homework, and the genuine affection she seemed to have for Lila and Theo. Sandra found herself increasingly relying on Zara, grateful for the extra help as she focused on expanding her yoga business. But beneath Zara's helpful exterior, a dangerous obsession was taking root. Her initial attraction to Dwayne had blossomed into a full-fledged infatuation, fueled by their daily interactions and the glimpses she caught of his life. She began to catalog every detail about him: the way he liked his coffee in the morning, the cologne he wore, the sound of his laughter when he played with the children. Zara's fixation manifested in subtle ways at first. She would linger in Dwayne's home office, running her fingers over his books and inhaling the scent of his jacket, left draped over a chair. When doing laundry, she would hold his shirts close, imagining what it would be like to be held by him. She volunteered to stay late, hoping to catch a moment alone with Dwayne when he returned from work. As her obsession grew, so did her resentment towards Sandra. In Zara's distorted view, Sandra was neglectful of her family, too focused on her own pursuits to appreciate the wonderful man she had married. Zara convinced herself that she could be a better wife to Dwayne, a better mother to the children. She began to insert herself more forcefully into family matters, offering unsolicited advice on everything from Dwayne's diet to the children's education. Dwayne, flattered by the attention and grateful for the help with the kids, failed to see the warning signs. He found himself looking forward to his interactions with Zara, drawn to her youthful energy and the way she seemed to hang on his every word. In Zara, he found the admiration and understanding he felt was lacking in his marriage. Sandra, however, began to sense that something was amiss. She noticed how Zara's eyes followed Dwayne around the room, the way the young woman's hand would linger a bit too long when passing him something. She saw how Zara tried to mimic her own style, buying similar clothes and even adopting some of her mannerisms. One evening, Sandra returned home early from a yoga class to find Zara wearing one of her dresses, standing in front of the mirror in the master bedroom. The young woman had been so engrossed in her fantasy that she hadn't heard Sandra enter. For a moment, they stared at each other in shocked silence before Zara stammered out an apology, claiming she had spilled something on her own clothes and needed to borrow something quickly. The incident left Sandra deeply unsettled. She tried to discuss her concerns with Dwayne, but he dismissed them as mere jealousy or overreaction. This dismissal drove a further wedge between them, exactly as Zara had hoped. As summer progressed, Zara's behavior became increasingly erratic. She began to accidentally run into Dwayne around town, showing up at his favorite coffee shop or the gym he frequented. She created problems in the house that required Dwayne's attention, manufacturing reasons for them to be alone together. In her private moments, Zara's fantasies took a dark turn. She imagined a life where Sandra no longer existed, where she could step seamlessly into the role of Dwayne's wife and the children's mother. The line between fantasy and reality began to blur in Zara's mind, her obsession consuming every aspect of her life. What had started as a harmless crush had morphed into a dangerous fixation. Zara was now willing to go to any lengths to make her twisted dreams a reality, setting the stage for a tragedy that would soon rock the quiet community to its core. The pivotal moment that pushed Zara over the edge came on a sweltering August evening. The Corrin family had planned a weekend getaway to celebrate Dwayne and Sandra's upcoming 10th wedding anniversary. Zara, who had been initially asked to house sit, manipulated the situation so that her presence was required for the trip to help with the children. As they settled into the luxurious lake house, the tension between Dwayne and Sandra was palpable. An argument that had been brewing for weeks finally erupted, their heated words carrying across the still water. Zara, who had taken the children for a walk to give the couple privacy, returned to find Sandra in tears and Dwayne storming off to cool down. In that moment, Zara saw her opportunity. She comforted the children, tucking them into bed with soothing words and promises of a better tomorrow. Then, she sought out Dwayne, finding him nursing a whiskey on the dock. Under the moonlight, Zara played the role of the sympathetic listener, allowing Dwayne to vent his frustrations about his marriage. As the night wore on and the whiskey flowed, Dwayne's inhibitions lowered. In a moment of weakness, he confided in Zara about his doubts, his fears, and his loneliness. Zara, seizing the moment, leaned in and kissed him. For a brief second, Dwayne responded before abruptly pulling away, horrified at what had transpired. Dwayne's rejection and subsequent apology to Sandra the next day shattered Zara's illusions. She realized that despite the problems in their marriage, Dwayne was committed to Sandra and their family. This realization, instead of deterring Zara, only fueled her determination. In her twisted logic, she concluded that the only thing standing between her and the life she desired was Sandra. On the drive back to Oak Ridge Lane, as Zara watched Dwayne and Sandra hold hands in reconciliation, a chilling resolve settled over her. She began to formulate a plan, one that would remove Sandra from the picture permanently. No longer content to wait and hope, Zara decided to take matters into her own hands. The carefree weekend that was meant to rejuvenate the Corrin family had instead set in motion a series of events that would lead to an unthinkable crime. Zara's obsession had crossed a line from which there was no return, and the quiet community was about to be rocked by a tragedy no one could have foreseen. In the weeks following the fateful weekend at the lake house, Zara's plan began to take shape with frightening precision. Her outward demeanor remained unchanged. She was still the perfect babysitter, doting on the children and maintaining a respectful distance from Dwayne. But behind her placid smile, a storm was brewing. Zara's first step was to gather information. She methodically went through the Corrin home when no one was around, photographing documents, noting schedules, and searching for anything she could use. She paid particular attention to Sandra's routine, tracking her comings and goings with obsessive detail. Next, Zara began to subtly manipulate the family dynamics. She would accidentally mention seeing Sandra talking closely with a male yoga student, planting seeds of doubt in Dwayne's mind. She encouraged Sandra to take on more classes and responsibilities at her studio, knowing it would create more tension in the marriage. With the children, she would make offhand comments about how much happier everyone seemed when Mommy wasn't around, slowly poisoning their perception of Sandra. As her plan progressed, Zara took steps to create an alibi for herself. She enrolled in evening classes at the local community college, establishing a routine that would place her far from the Corrin home on certain nights. She cultivated friendships with other babysitters in the neighborhood, ensuring she had people who could vouch for her character and whereabouts. One crucial element of Zara's plan involved technology. Using her knowledge from a brief stint in IT during college, she installed spyware on the family's computers and phones. This gave her access to emails, text messages, and even GPS locations. She used this information to stay one step ahead, always knowing where everyone was and what they were doing. Zara also began to alter her appearance subtly. She dyed her hair a shade closer to Sandra's, started wearing clothes that mimicked Sandra's style, and even adopted some of her mannerisms. In her deluded mind, she was preparing to step into Sandra's life seamlessly once the other woman was out of the picture. As the day she had chosen for her plan to culminate approached, Zara became more daring. She borrowed items from Sandra, a scarf here, a piece of jewelry there, things that could be used to implicate Sandra in nefarious activities if necessary. She also began to stockpile supplies, disposable gloves, cleaning products, and a set of clothes identical to what she planned to wear on the fateful day. Throughout all of this, Zara maintained her facade of normalcy. She continued to excel in her role as a babysitter, even receiving glowing praise from Sandra for her dedication. Dwayne, still guilt-ridden over the incident at the lake house, kept his distance, which only served to reinforce Zara's belief that he was unhappy in his marriage. The red flags were there, but they went unnoticed or were explained away. The slight changes in Zara's appearance were attributed to youthful experimentation. Her probing questions about the family's schedule were seen as conscientiousness. Even her occasional odd behavior was chalked up to the stress of working and studying. As summer turned to fall, the Corrin family remained blissfully unaware of the danger that had taken root in their home. October 17th dawned crisp and clear, the autumn leaves a riot of red and gold against the pale blue sky. It was a day like any other in the community. But for Zara Jackman, it was the day everything would change. The day she would finally claim the life she believed was rightfully hers. Zara arrived at the Corrin home early, her demeanor calm and collected. She greeted Sandra with a smile, discussing the day's schedule as if it were any other morning. Dwayne had already left for work, and the children were at school. Everything was proceeding according to plan. As Sandra prepared to leave for her morning yoga class, Zara made her move. She offered Sandra a smoothie, claiming it was a new energy-boosting recipe she'd learned. Sandra, always health-conscious, accepted gratefully. What she didn't know was that the smoothie was laced with a powerful sedative Zara had obtained through less than legal means. Within minutes, Sandra began to feel dizzy and disoriented. Zara, feigning concern, suggested she lie down for a moment. As Sandra's consciousness faded, Zara's mask of concern melted away, replaced by a cold determination. She methodically began to set her plan in motion. First, Zara changed into clothes identical to what Sandra had been wearing. She then carefully applied makeup to subtly alter her features, making herself look more like Sandra from a distance. With practiced ease, she gathered Sandra's personal effects, her phone, keys, and wallet. Next came the most crucial and disturbing part of her plan. Zara maneuvered Sandra's unconscious form into the trunk of Sandra's own car. She then drove to a pre-selected location, an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. There, in the dusty gloom, Zara committed the unthinkable act that would forever change the lives of everyone involved. The details of what transpired in that warehouse would later shock even the most hardened detectives. Suffice it to say, Zara's actions were brutal and methodical. She had planned for every contingency, using her knowledge of forensics to minimize evidence. When it was over, Zara stood over Sandra's lifeless body, her hand shaking not with remorse but with a perverse sense of accomplishment. Zara then embarked on the next phase of her plan. She drove Sandra's car to a nearby lake, wiping it clean of fingerprints before pushing it into the water. She had chosen this spot carefully, knowing the depth and currents would make recovery difficult. With the grim task completed, Zara made her way back, using a series of prearranged rides and public transportation to avoid detection. She arrived back at the Corrin home just in time to greet the children as they returned from school, the perfect picture of a caring babysitter. As evening fell, Zara put her acting skills to the test. She called Dwayne, her voice filled with convincing concern, asking if he had heard from Sandra. She then suggested calling Sandra's yoga studio and some of her friends. As worry began to set in, Zara proposed calling the police to report Sandra missing. The hours that followed were a whirlwind of police activity and growing fear. Zara played her part perfectly, the concerned family friend, offering support to Dwayne and comfort to the confused and frightened children. She answered the police's questions with just the right mix of helpfulness and anxiety, providing the alibi she had so carefully constructed. As night deepened and hope for Sandra's safe return diminished, Zara allowed herself a moment of private triumph. In her twisted mind, she had succeeded. Sandra was gone, and now she could step into the role she had coveted for so long. She imagined comforting Dwayne in his grief, becoming a mother to Lila and Theo, and finally having the family she believed she deserved. But even as Zara reveled in her perceived victory, the wheels of justice were already turning. The meticulous planning, the careful execution, none of it would be enough to hide the truth forever. The quiet community had been shattered by an act of unthinkable violence, and the aftermath would reveal dark secrets and shattered lives in ways no one could have anticipated. The disappearance of Sandra Corin sent shockwaves through the community. As dawn broke the day after Sandra vanished, the quiet suburb transformed into a hive of police activity. Detective Ava Ramirez, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for solving complex cases, took charge of the investigation. The first 48 hours were crucial. Detective Ramirez and her team combed through the Corin home, searching for any clues that might shed light on Sandra's disappearance. They interviewed neighbors, colleagues, and friends, building a timeline of Sandra's last known movements. Initially, the prevailing theory was that Sandra had left of her own accord. There were whispers of marital problems, of Sandra feeling stifled in her role as a wife and mother. But those who knew her best vehemently rejected this idea. Sandra, they insisted, would never abandon her children. As the investigation progressed, suspicion inevitably fell on Dwayne. It was the sad reality of such cases that the spouse was often the first person of interest. Dwayne's alibi for the day of Sandra's disappearance was solid. He had been in meetings at work all day, verified by multiple colleagues. Still, detectives probed into the couple's financial records and personal lives, leaving no stone unturned. Throughout the investigation, Zara remained a peripheral figure. She was interviewed as a witness, providing a detailed account of her last interactions with Sandra. Her demeanor was appropriately distraught, her story consistent. To the investigators, she appeared to be nothing more than a concerned babysitter, genuinely worried about the woman who had employed her. A community rallied around the Corin family. Volunteers organized search parties, combing through nearby woods and parks. Flyers with Sandra's picture appeared on every street corner and in shop windows. Local news channels ran nightly updates on the case, keeping it in the public eye. As days turned into weeks with no sign of Sandra, the investigation began to stall. Leads dried up, and theories grew more speculative. Digging deeper, Ramirez discovered that Zara's impeccable credentials had been carefully fabricated. The university she claimed to have graduated from had no record of her attendance. References when contacted again seemed hesitant and evasive. It was as if Zara Jackman had appeared out of thin air just months before she started working for the Corin family. This revelation sparked a renewed investigation, this time focused on the babysitter who had seamlessly integrated herself into the Corin household. As Ramirez and her team delved into Zara's past, a disturbing pattern emerged. They uncovered a trail of false identities and suspicious circumstances stretching back several years. A breakthrough came when they connected Zara to a case in another state. A married man had reported being stalked by a young woman matching Zara's description. The case had been dropped when the woman suddenly disappeared, but the similarities were striking. Armed with this new information, Ramirez brought Zara in for questioning. The interrogation was a masterclass in psychological warfare. For hours, Zara maintained her innocence, her carefully constructed persona holding firm. But as Ramirez methodically presented the evidence they had gathered, cracks began to show in Zara's facade. It was a seemingly innocuous question about Zara's childhood that finally broke her. In a moment of confusion, Zara mentioned a detail about her past that contradicted her earlier statements. Sensing weakness, Ramirez pressed harder. Suddenly, like a dam breaking, Zara's composure crumbled. In a chilling confession, she revealed the full extent of her obsession with Dwayne and her plot to replace Sandra. As Zara talked, the true horror of her actions came to light. She described in disturbing detail how she had planned and executed Sandra's murder, her voice devoid of remorse as she recounted the events of that fateful day. She spoke of her belief that she and Dwayne were meant to be together, that she was saving him from an unhappy marriage. With Zara's confession, the investigation shifted into high gear. Based on the information she provided, search teams were dispatched to the lake where Sandra's car had been dumped. After days of searching, the vehicle was recovered, providing crucial forensic evidence. The abandoned warehouse where the murder had taken place became a crime scene, yielding more damning evidence against Zara. Investigators were shocked by the level of premeditation revealed by what they found. It was clear that Zara had been planning this for months. As news of Zara's arrest broke, the community reeled in shock. Neighbors who had invited her into their homes, parents who had trusted her with their children, all struggled to reconcile the friendly babysitter they thought they knew with the disturbed individual revealed by the investigation. As the case moved to trial, more details of Zara's troubled past came to light. A history of obsessive behavior, stalking, and identity fraud painted a picture of a deeply disturbed individual. Mental health experts debated the extent of her psychological issues, but all agreed that she represented a dangerous combination of cunning and instability. The trial, Zara, now fully embracing her notoriety, showed no remorse for her actions. Her chilling testimony, recounting her obsession and the murder with an unsettling calmness, left the courtroom in stunned silence. The prosecution presented a mountain of evidence, from forensic analysis to Zara's own meticulous records of her plan. In the end, the jury took less than a day to reach a verdict. Zara Jackman was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As she was led from the courtroom, her final glance at Dwayne sent chills through all who witnessed it, a look not of remorse but of possessive longing. For the residents, the conclusion of the trial brought a mixture of relief and lingering unease. The picturesque suburb had lost its innocence, its sense of safety shattered by the knowledge that such darkness could lurk behind a friendly smile and a helping hand.